We think we know better. And that's why people make up origin stories. That's why we have the Big Bang. That's why we have evolution. None of that is quote unquote scientific. God, the one who created you, is the only one that can tell you the actual true meaning of anything. You can't know without belief. Everyone starts with belief. Because if you don't, you'll never start. Antibodies don't exist in the way they claim. Nobody's ever seen these Y-shaped, all those receptors. Think about the claims made about cholesterol. You don't even have to go this route to kind of falsify the notion that cholesterol is causing heart disease. But once you do, all this goes out the window.
Part of the reason why society is so chaotic right now is that people don't have a shared starting point to evaluate their beliefs, their principles, their values.
I don't believe in free will because can I freely will myself to believe I'm a female cat right now? I'm free to do it, but my desires and my deepest convictions would show that, am I free then?
Dr. Jordan Grant, I almost called you Mr. Jordan Grant. I don't think you would have been offended by that at all.
Not at all.
Yeah,
I have yet to get used to being called doctor and probably never will.
Right. Exactly. Especially because you've come to understand that so much of your medical training was, a lot of nonsense.
And appealing to credentials, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. But thanks for joining me on the show again, man.
Man, I'm happy to be back. I love it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course, man. I consider you one of the deepest thinkers that I know. And we were also talking about how that can sometimes be a little bit of a trap because we can, tend to be caught up in our minds so much. And I want to talk about that a little bit.
Absolutely.
Especially because you seem to have sort of softened that a little bit and learned to really pull yourself out of your head, so to speak, and just be even more comfortable with I don't freaking know.
Yeah.
So I got to go with what's useful, quote unquote. With that being said, I would like to start by playing a video. We mentioned it in our last podcast episode. I'm going to link our last podcast episode in the show notes because I kind of want to build off of that one a little bit. But we mentioned a video called The Problem of the Criterion, and we didn't actually play the video. I think I did link that in the show notes. But with that being said, we're going to play the video and I want to hear your comments on it because it took me a few times to watch this video to really grasp what it's saying. So we'll go ahead and play the video and then I want to hear your comments on it.
Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we're going to be looking at something called the problem of the criterion. This is a problem posed by Roderick Chisholm, and it's a problem for the very foundations of knowledge. A quick caution before we get going. This is a basic introduction to the problem of the criterion. If you want more information, you should check out Theory of Knowledge by Roderick M. Chisholm, or the entry on Roderick Chisholm in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. With that out of the way, let's get started. Now, this is going to be a problem for the very beginning of knowledge. It's the beginning of our process of trying to find knowledge. Chisholm claims that we can either answer the question, what can we know? Or what is the criteria of knowledge? But we're unable to answer both of them. Basically, if we answer the question, what can we know first, then we're going to be arbitrarily deciding what we do know and what we don't know without really a good criterion for separating them. But if we answer the other question, what is the criteria of knowledge first, then we're going to be coming up with an arbitrary criteria for separating knowledge without having specific examples of either knowledge or not knowledge. To make this a little more concrete, let's look at an example. Imagine we have a pile of grains of sand, and we are told that some of these grains of sand are rodrikite. And we are tasked with separating the sand into sand that is rodrikite and sand that is not rodrikite. We could take a particular sample that we've already been told some of the grains of sand are rodrikite and some are not. And based on this particular sample, we could develop a criterion for determining which grains of sand are rodrikite and which ones are not. This would be a particularist solution. We would then apply the criterion to a larger set and so on and so forth and be able to divide the sand. We could also be given a method or a criterion. A grain of sand is rodrikite if and only if. This would be a method. And then, based on this criterion, we could go ahead and separate the sand. This is a Methodist solution to this problem. What this leaves us with is, if we're given particular cases, we can devise a method. And given a method, we can devise particular cases. But if we're given neither, there's no way for us to divide the sand. To answer one question, we must first answer the other, and vice versa. So, if we are given neither a method nor particular cases of what rodrikite is, there is no way for us to divide the sand into what is rodrikite and what isn't rodrikite. The same applies for knowledge. Imagine we have, instead of sand, a pile of beliefs, and we're told we must divide these beliefs into beliefs that are knowledge and beliefs that are not knowledge. If we were given a set of beliefs and told that these beliefs are not knowledge and these beliefs are a particular sample, we could develop a criterion based on those beliefs. This would be a particularist solution. If, on the other hand, we were given a criterion, a belief is knowledge if and only if, then we would use that method to separate those beliefs based on that criterion. This would be the Methodist solution. The problem, of course, is that we are given neither a particular case or a method. If we were given either, we could figure out the other one. But because we're given neither, we're stuck in a loop of trying to determine one without having the other. To find the answer to one question, one must first find the answer to the other. Therefore, just as we could not divide the grains of sand without a method or a particular case, we cannot divide the beliefs we have into knowledge and not knowledge without a method or a particular case. To be clear on the positions that are out there, the Methodist claims to know the method to find knowledge without knowing what actually is knowledge. Basically, they're saying that I have a method, I'm going to stick with that method, even though I'm not sure what is and what isn't knowledge out there. The particularist, on the other hand, claims to know what is knowledge, but doesn't claim to have a method for finding what that knowledge is. Basically, they're saying that I know this and I don't know this, and the method for differentiating those does not matter. The final position, of course, is the skeptic, who claims neither a method nor a particular case, as, recognizing the problem of the criterion, one is always required for the other. I'll leave you with a quote from Chisholm himself. What few philosophers have had the courage to recognize is this: we can deal with a problem only by begging the question. It seems to me that if we do recognize this fact, as we should, then it is unseemly for us to try to pretend that it isn't so. Watch this video and more at carneades.org, and stay skeptical, everybody.
Okay, so please explain that to me like I'm 5.
Yeah.
That, especially for people who are seeing that for the first time, can be so conceptual. Like, break it down into how it applies to reality for us.
And I had to do the same, especially watching that video because of the way he talked and everything like that.
Also, his microphone is horrible. So that's
Yeah.
hard to get past.
The problem, it's very simple if you think about it. And it really goes back to what we talked about originally about how do you know anything at all without succumbing to either infinite regress or being circular. Okay. And that's all he's saying is, if you're going to claim knowledge in some type of way that you claim you can prove it, you either you have 3 choices. You have circularity, which ends up, self-referential. So that's not really a proof. You have infinite regress, meaning you can never get back to the starting point because you have to keep going, well, how do I know that? How do I know that? How do I know that? Or you have to start with axioms where you assume certain starting points and reason from there. This is just an offshoot of that. It's just another way to restate that. Basically, what he's saying is we have to have a standard to even discern what is and is not truth or knowledge. But how do you know what that standard is? So it's a circular problem.
So basically, how do you know that standard gives you what is true?
Exactly. So and the way you can think about it in terms of quote unquote the scientific method. Who told them that was the right method to investigate anything? Where did they get that? Okay, there's so many assumptions layered just into that alone about the nature of reality, about changing one variable and holding all these other. They have not been given this from God as a blueprint for knowledge. You have to have a standard. And in my opinion, the standard must be divine to be true. It must be from the Creator who knows how everything works to tell you, hey, here's the standard. And I think my opinion with morality, that's what we have biblically because you have a standard of morality. So then I can compare that to behavior and thoughts and things like that. That's my standard. It's no different with knowledge. So that's what this is saying is what is your standard? There's a excellent book by Greg Bahnsen. He was a apologist, Christian apologist. I don't agree with the majority of his philosophy because he sort of tried to argue for circular reasoning as proofs for God, which you cannot do. But he wrote a great book called By What Standard? ? And I find myself doing that all the time, especially when people are making ought claims, O-U-G-H-T, ought, like ethical claims. And I go, what is your standard for saying that?
Give me an example of an ought claim.
Like, you should do this.
Yeah.
You should do X,
Based
Y,
on
Z.
what standard? Got
Yeah,
it.
you go,
Got it.
by what standard is that? But you can do it with physics, you can do it with chemistry, you can do it with medicine. You know, anytime they're making claims about entities or lab work or any of these things, you go, but what is your standard that you're using to compare against, right? To claim anything. And then they'll give you that standard usually, and you go, how do you know that's the right standard? How do you know that's proper? That's what the problem of the criterion is. Boiled down simply is, what is your standard and how do you know it's true? And if you're using a standard to arrive at quote unquote knowledge, you have to have knowledge of that standard being right. Where did you get that knowledge? And what standard did you use there? So then you're back in infinite regress, right? So that's basically what he's saying. And it's a very honest take at the issue. And I think, like he said, a lot of philosophers just haven't gone there, but it stares you in the face once you start thinking about all this. It's a big deal.
And I can see where that might lead someone into like a total nihilistic perspective, and we'll get there because I definitely want to discuss that. For me, it just brings up though, like, what can we actually know? And we sort of touched on that in the last episode. We danced her out a little bit though. What can we actually know as human beings?
I don't know. I mean,
that's the problem, man.
Well, we have to define knowledge, right? And I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I'm the one to give you the definition of knowledge.
Right.
I think a lot of people, what is commonly thought of as knowledge or quote unquote common knowledge is actually just opinion. Mm-hmm. It's common opinion. And there's nothing wrong with that. We basically all operate our lives on opinion and via induction. And when I say induction, I mean we generalize the past to the future. We generalize particulars to universals. We all do it. I assume when I sit down on this couch, it's going to hold me up. Why? Because that's what it's designed to do, and that's what it's done every other time I've sat on it. Does that mean I know with a fact it's going to hold me up? No. So for me, and this depends on the person you're talking to, and this is, you can get into the weeds in philosophy on just the definition of knowledge. For me, because I'm a pedant or I'm pedantic about this stuff, knowledge to me is like cannot be wrong. Yeah. Infallible, true. And for me, that can only come from God. I know other people probably have different ideas, but then when you start getting in these rabbit trails, that's why this is an issue. That's why there's a whole subject of epistemology. If we knew without a doubt, this wouldn't even be a discussion.
A lot of people take knowledge to mean just information.
Right.
And that's the problem. Because what I take knowledge to mean is exactly what you said. Like it is fundamentally true, universally speaking. And in that sense, I'm like, can we actually know anything at all?
Well, not without first having a belief in some things.
Right.
You cannot avoid belief. Yeah. Everyone starts with belief. Because if you don't, you'll never start. Okay. So and we talked about that last time, but that's the whole point of infinite regress and trying to avoid it is you have to start your reasoning from somewhere. If you can prove your starting points, it's not a starting point. Then something comes prior. Okay. If it's a conclusion, then there has to be something prior to the conclusion. Well, then if that's its own conclusion, what's before that? What's before that? There has to be a starting point. It's just like geometry. It's no different. You have axioms and you have theorems that are deduced from those axioms.
Do you describe what an axiom is real quick? I'm just going to interrupt when I can just to break it down into layman's terms for people who are listening. What is an axiom?
A lot of people there's opinion on this. A lot of people say axioms are just quote unquote self-evident truths. That's self-evident is subjective, right? An axiom is a starting point and it can be chosen. In fact, they are. They're chosen. You can't prove your starting point axioms, okay? You can't.
A perfect example, if I may, real quick, of an axiom might be that I'm going to start with, I believe my sensory experience tells me the truth about reality.
That would be an axiom.
Yeah.
Yep. And a lot of the empiricists tried to use that, and Hume, who was an empiricist, by the end of it became a solipsist because you realize that at the end of the day, if all you have is sense data and your own perceptions, you can't check them against the quote unquote real world that you don't know exists.
Right.
So you're stuck in your mind. So but that would be a starting point. And that's my point is people don't think they have faith in these things. Everyone has faith in something. And even the most rabid materialistic atheist, well, that's his axioms are A, B, C, D, E, the world was this, it was, they got all these stories about the beginnings and materialism. Those are axioms. None of that is provable.
Yeah.
Those are starting points that they then argue from there to further conclusions. And so an axiom, the laws of logic would be axiomatic because you can't appeal, you can't use, talk about things without using logic. You can't even talk about the laws of logic without using those laws. And we all have to communicate that way, that a cat is a cat and not a dog, right? Like the people who deprecate logic use it to deprecate it.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can't escape it. It's self-refuting.
Basically, there's circular reasoning baked into it, right?
There are. And that's why it's like you can't try to prove it because it only becomes circular when you claim you can prove it. Yeah. And then you end up arguing in a circle. If it's axiomatic, that's your starting point, and then you go from there. And that doesn't mean everybody has to agree with you, but we all do it, even if we don't know we're doing it.
If you frequently tune into the Way Forward podcast, don't skip this one. This is personal. If you've ever felt a shift from something that you've heard on this podcast, if it's helped you to see things more clearly, if it's helped you to break down a limiting belief system, if it's helped you just to generally question, or if it's helped you to feel less alone, then I'm asking you from my heart to help us keep going. We're not backed by corporate sponsors, venture capital money, or big donors, and that has been a deliberate choice. And we've said no to a lot of ad deals that weren't aligned because we don't want our mission to be shaped by products, brands, and agendas that we don't actually believe in. There are a few trusted brands and products that do support us, and we're incredibly grateful for that. But the reality is, this is primarily sustained by our listeners and viewers. Right now, this podcast has roughly 140,000 video and audio downloads a month, and it's continuing to grow. And only a small fraction of that actually help contribute financially. That's not a guilt trip, it's just the reality. We haven't said this directly enough, so here it is. If you'd like this podcast to continue, please help support us by becoming a member of thewayforward.com. If even a small fraction of listeners and viewers chose to support, we'd be able to easily sustain this. A membership at thewayforward.com is $99 annually, which amounts to about $8 a month. Think of it like a couple organic kombuchas at your local health food store, or maybe a fancy latte every month. And also think of it like this. In addition to ensuring that we can continue, you're actively supporting yourself in the process. TheWayForward.com is a private membership platform that allows you to instantly connect with aligned people, practitioners, farms, schools, restaurants, and more in your local area. And if the platform isn't for you, we've added a donation option as well. You'll find both of those in the show notes. If you've received something from the show, please consider giving back by becoming a member so we can continue to reach people, not just as a podcast, but as a movement for something good, true, and beautiful. Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you for walking this path with us. You know what comes up for me thinking about that, reflecting on the critical thinking crisis, so to speak, across the world? I think you would agree with that. Like there's clear problems in how people think, which is, I think, part of the reason why society is so chaotic right now, let's say, like amongst mankind, is that people don't even know what an axiom is, first off, but like underneath that, it's that, without even referring to the term axiom, it's that people don't have a shared starting point to evaluate their beliefs, their principles, their values, like what is, quote, good versus what is, quote, bad. There's no shared starting point there. And then people have an inability to acknowledge that they are operating on a foundation of what is actually just a belief. And that's okay.
Well, it has to be okay because it's just the way it is. You can't escape it. And I think that's something else that's been driven into us by these people who pretend like they don't have beliefs, and they're delusional. But that's become a standard rhetoric in especially public schooling because of the materialistic worldview and evolution and all these things. Science is the only gateway for knowledge, all this rhetoric. And that is passed down from birth to death to most of us, honestly. If you don't grow up, being homeschooled and taught how to critically think and all these things, you're going to just get hammered with this rhetoric, and you just absorb it and repeat it. And we all think, oh, belief is bad. Belief, oh, that's just your belief, but you don't know that. It's like you don't even understand how knowledge works.
Or the statement, belief is the enemy of knowing.
You can't know without belief.
Again,
like that's just, again, I have to believe some things to get started. We talked about this last time with Descartes, right?
Yeah.
With the rationalists. And the problem with the rationalists was their starting point, I exist. Well, what can you deduce from that? If that's all you got, you're almost back in solipsism. It's just me. I just exist, but then do I know anything else? Can I say, and I don't try to force my own beliefs, obviously, on anybody else. I'm comfortable with where I'm at in my starting foundations, being I do believe that, and yeah, there are crazy issues with biblical stuff, and you can ask questions all day long that you're never going to get the answers to. But I believe that somewhere in there is a revelation from the Creator, not necessarily that all of it, like, because there's lots of descriptive stuff in the Bible. It doesn't mean it's prescriptive. I'm more going for when it says the Lord says, or a prophet says here,
or maybe even what Jesus says.
Exactly, absolutely. And I go, okay, these are sort of my standards for if I believe this, if I believe it, we're back to belief, then I can know because I deduce from those beliefs either directly, I don't have to deduce anything because the statements are there, but we can take premises and deduce a lot of things. And a lot of people don't like that because they go, well, that doesn't let me know much about anything at all. And it's like, you can't know much about anything at all anyway. They'll say, well, that means I can't know, like one of my, I was listening to a podcast last night and I've listened to it a million times, but he was talking about the subject. He said, people hate this because they go, well, that means I can't know a lot about Chinese history. And he's like, yeah, it does. We can't know any history at all. Not know it infallibly. You weren't there. Right. And Chinese history, if you actually go and research it, a lot of it seems incredible. Like almost fable-ish, you know? But we can't know anything. I tell people like, I can't prove to you what I ate for lunch 2 days ago.
And that doesn't mean that it can't be useful either, right? Like you can still like glean what is useful information from history, whether or not it's true, because appealing to history is a whole separate thing. We can't know for sure, but it's that just acknowledge that it's a belief and that's okay. Like I believe, for example, I believe that this is a divine revelation from the Creator. Good. Is that making your life better? Yes. Is that the standard that you employ to assess whether something is useful or not? Yes. Okay. Is this making me happier, healthier, whatever, you value, let's say?
Yeah. And there's a lot of stuff that's not biblical that I still have to just make my way through the world like anybody else and finding what's useful doesn't necessarily mean I have full knowledge of anything. And that's where I think we get, because I do think God gave us our senses for a reason. And you and I have talked about this where I do think, and I can't prove this, and I can't even prove it biblically, that I think the sense data we get, I think we can assess true effects. But even then, I still have to believe like you and I are sitting in this room right now.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people, they'll give you the whole, well, what if you're just a brain in a jar? What if you're just in a simulation? Okay. That's fine if you want to believe it, but then what do you do with it? Do you live your life like that?
Right.
No. You live your life like you're in a real world, like that your actions have consequences, that you should probably love your neighbor, that, all these things are actually real. So that's the problem with the solipsism is that nobody actually really lives like a solipsist. And so that's sort of like, I still though have to use induction. I have to use belief and opinion. I have to use what's pragmatic in certain cases when it's not an ethical situation, like the decision to wear contact lenses. That's useful for me if I don't want to walk around with blurry vision all the time. And do I think that I know that I have blurry vision? Yeah, I do think I have that knowledge because it's internal into me. That's sort of I think we get in the weeds when we start talking about knowledge that way, because I do think there are, and again, that's just my opinion about this stuff, is that there are things we can kind of know based on how God set up the world and our sensory organs, but that doesn't give us the meaning of reality or the fundamentals about nature or metaphysics or
That's
any of those
point.
things.
It's I think let me try to articulate what you're saying here. Your starting axiom there is that my senses can give me a general sense about the observations of reality and quote unquote truth associated with it, right? For example, like this cup is here, right? I think the words are so hard. I think if we put 1 million people in this room who have all available senses that we have, the 5 physical primary ones, I'm not saying that those are the only ones, by the way,
right,
they would acknowledge that this cup is here,
yes,
right? And that's our shared starting point as a belief, and that's okay.
That's right.
And I think that the problem is, though, I don't even know how to articulate this. Is that the right starting point, though?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me think of where I want to go with that. Hold on 1 second.
I know exactly what you're trying to say, I feel like, because I think about these things to the point where I'm blue in the face. The issue for me, when you start looking at knowledge claims, especially from the quote unquote scientific community, their claims are about the fundamental nature of reality.
This is what I was going to say.
Yep.
This is what I was going to say. Okay. I remember now. It's that gives you a sense of the observation, the effect that you're witnessing, right? But what happens is we then try to apply stories on the why and the how.
100%.
And we have no freaking clue on the why and the how.
100%. You can't know it because you don't even know what method to use to get there.
Right.
Back to the problem with the criterion. And that's my belief. I think we can know the real world effects that we see if we believe we're in a real world. Again, we got to have belief, but if we all agree on those starting points, that we are sitting in this room, that I'm looking at a sink over there, that it's, the fan is blowing right now, all these things, I feel it on my skin. Can I appeal to that for like true infallible knowledge? Again, no, because I have to believe that I'm those things, right? I can't just prove. This is the thing with knowledge is people want you to claim you have to prove it. You can't prove, there are things you cannot prove, and that has to be okay. You cannot prove that you're in this reality. You cannot prove that I'm sitting across from you. We both believe it and accept it as a fact. And that's okay. I think that's the issue we're trying to talk about, is that it's okay. We need to actually, because that's just being honest. Yep. But science, quote unquote, what is claimed it can do, and I'm reifying science as an entity, but you know what I mean, the method, or even not the method, what is claimed to be science and all this that encompasses.
We're going to get to that again.
We will. And so that's the issue, is that there's a difference between collating data and taxonomy and naming things and just collecting information and then spinning a causal story about why those things are that way.
Right.
Yep. That's the big difference.
I'll give an example, and I'm going to call myself out here. And I will say that I try to do a good job of saying I think, or at least just asking questions associated with it. But I'll just give an example. So Veda Austin's work, right? She takes water in a petri dish, sets it over the top of a written word, gratitude, and she sees a repeatable pattern where, for example, when she sets it over the top of that word or a picture that appears to represent gratitude, water will show a 6-pointed leaf. That's an effect that is witnessed, right?
Correct.
And then I have this whole story that I've come up with in my mind, and I don't know for sure that it's true, but it just feels good inside of me. I'm like, this is one possible explanation. I want it to be true so badly, because to me, it indicates that this world is so much more beautiful and interconnected than we can possibly ever know. But again, it is a belief. And here's the story I come up with. Okay, there's thought energy that is traveling through light, through the biofield, through the ether, that then imprints upon the water. The water takes on that information and orients itself. Do I know that? Heck no, not at all. Like, I can't possibly know that. And again, I try to be very careful with my language, but that's an example there. You see an effect happening in reality, and then based on our conditioning, based on a variety of things that we've been exposed to in this life, or maybe you could even say at some level just how we are, you know what I mean? That's a whole separate category I want to get into. And like, maybe some of us are just born like this, so to speak. I've talked about that before when it comes to dissolving conditioned beliefs. And it's like, okay, how do you go about doing that? Is this just an innate aspect of who I am? With that being said, it's like we try to apply a story to it and say that this is it. This is the explanation for it. And where that gets incredibly dangerous, if you're not willing to check yourselves or check other people, is what happened with COVID, or the entire vaccine schedule, or politics. Like, literally anything that leads to what most of us would agree is harmful to other human beings. Because that's what happens, is people say that this is what is the cause of that phenomenon that I'm witnessing.
Bingo. That's my big impetus for talking about this. Number one, I like it. It's interesting. It's fascinating. But number two, because of the implications in the world, not only for these things about science and where people go with beliefs about genes and vaccines and viruses and nonsense, like that, everyday stuff you hear. My wife and I do this every day. I'll have a pain somewhere. What do first thing we start doing? Yeah, maybe it was because of this. Maybe it was because of this and this and this. And then I think that, and I'll start building a story in my head, and she's like, you don't know that. And I go, you're right. And she'll do the same thing. And I go, could be, it's possible, but it could be a million other things too. This is what the scientists mean, or the philosophers of science at least, when they say that all observations are theory laden, because they are. Theory meaning a story we're building to interpret what we see. And this is the issue. And we talked about this last time, with the example of you're giving somebody a painting, and they're not told what the author's intent was.
Or a cake.
Or a cake, yeah. But you're going to look at that painting and you go interpret it. What did the author intend? You'll have if you give 1,000 people, you get 1,000 different explanations. And then the author comes along, or the painter, and goes, you're all wrong. Here's what I meant. Well, if he told you that ahead of time, you'd know. You'd have knowledge of what he intended. A good example that one of the guys I like to listen to, John Robbins, he was a student of Gordon Clark. He gave the example of a symphony. And the the composer gives people, ahead of time, like what everything meant in the music. And then they reject it. They don't even read it. And then they go and listen to the symphony and all they hear is happy birthday. And because it's just whatever, for biases, unknown reasons. And then he comes back and goes, you guys didn't even read what I had written, and said about all this. Like and that was supposed to be God giving revelation, right? You know what I mean? Like, because God, the one who created you, is the only one that can tell you the actual true meaning of anything. Here's why I did it, guys. Here's why you're here. Here's what, we are just children, like just fumbling our way through. And I do think there are a lot of people that were honest about that. At least it was, this was talked about. The more I've researched this in the last 2 years, you find out quickly that these topics were very prominent in the quote unquote scientific world, especially philosophy of science. And this
around what time?
I would say probably mainly the 20th century.
Okay.
I don't know if I've come into the late 1800s that we're discussing this. It more became an issue in the, I would say, early 1900s is when you start seeing a lot of this topic.
You see that.
There's a lot of interesting stuff in the early 20th century.
100%,
if it's even the true 20th century. I mean, we don't know.
That's a whole separate topic.
Yeah, dude. But even if you start really reading a lot of even Einstein stuff, and I've made fun of Einstein and all these things, you start reading what he actually said. He was honest. He's like, this stuff I'm talking about with relativity, it's a story. He's like, no experiment, he even said, could prove me right at all. He said, the true nature of reality, we will never know.
Yeah.
These guys were honest. And you start seeing that more and more. And and I spoke about this on a podcast the other day. I think that's why things shifted from prove this, prove that, to if you talk to true people in true science these days will say you can't prove. There's no proof. It's the parrots who say it. It's the cage stage atheists out there who think they're smart and they're not, and they're saying, oh, prove this, prove that. Or just the regular Joe, you got to prove it. And you go talk to these people who actually understand a little philosophy and they go, that's not how it works, guys. The problem is a lot of them weren't okay with that. So what did they have to do? They had to hoodwink people with probability claims and statistics.
Yeah.
And that's taken over because none of that gives you truth. It doesn't. Statistics is just a snapshot. It's a descriptor of the past. Doesn't tell anybody what's going to happen in the future, and it sure as heck doesn't have anything to do with cause and effect.
Yeah.
If it does, you can't know it, right? That's what I always tell people. Is like, yeah, you can correlate some stuff, but can you know the true meaning of those correlations? Like truly?
Right.
No.
Yeah, the interworkings of how those things actually relate.
That's right.
It's interesting because how would you square that with, let's say, a study where the p-value is 0.000001 between one thing and another thing, like showing a strong statistical significance in the relationship?
Things can track together perfectly, but you don't know why. Okay. And even the great atheist philosopher Bertrand Russell mentions this in his book. And I would encourage anybody to go get, I think it's from like 1912. I can't remember. It's called The Problem of Philosophy. He has chapters on induction and on deduction and on this issue of correlation and of things tracking together even perfectly, and how that still doesn't give you knowledge of cause. We're importing a lot of presuppositions into how we think things work causally, like it's this mechanistic thing. And that's my issue with scientific method. You go, well, you have to change only one variable but hold everything else constant. Really? Is that how things work in reality?
Dude, this brings up a really important question. Can the scientific method actually be followed? Because
you don't know, we're not omniscient, for starters, and we're not omnipotent. We're not God. And I know people don't like this answer because they're like, well, we can't know anything. It's like, yeah, exactly. But only God could control all the variables and know all the variables involved in any natural. Now, if we're talking about technology, and this, again, let's talk about this real quick, because this is the other big hoodwink. People have substituted men making things and transforming the world, which we are meant to do. We are meant to be creative. We are image bearers of God. God creates, we create. Animals do not do this. They do not think. They do not have logic. They do not take the world and truly craft it with a goal in mind. And I know a lot of the animal rights people aren't going to like that, but it's just, there's a difference between beasts and humans. There just is. Technology is, people equate technology and science all the time, and they're not the same thing. At least theoretically on paper, they're not supposed to be the same thing. In reality, that's actually what science ends up being, is technology. We've done this, we've made these devices, they've helped us in the world to do things, build a better mousetrap. But as far as like getting down to knowledge of, again, the why of how something in nature works, no, because you don't know what's involved in that in the first place. That it's kind of insane if you actually think about it, right? If I see a lightning bolt, even if I could do some things and reproduce what looks like a lightning bolt, I don't have enough knowledge to even know if that's the same thing I just saw in the sky that's happening naturally. It's not the same thing. Men can be very good mimickers of what's going on out there. And I think the hubris and arrogance of all of us is that we think we're finding out and searching out and knowing these truths of the creation that we live in. And I think it's arrogance, honestly. I really do.
I would say at some level, the scientific method, if followed strictly, is useful insofar as that it can help you falsify things.
I agree. To a point. There's some debate on that. I would have said that 2 years ago. If you read into some of the works of I can't remember his first name, his last name is Quine, Quine, and he talks about underdetermination of data, meaning you don't know all the variables involved. So even if, let's say you fail a hypothesis, you do an experiment and it doesn't cause the effect, you still don't know if it's because your variable or your IV, your independent variable was incorrect, or were there other variables at play that were not correct, right? You don't know. Again, we're back to the problem of knowledge. We don't know all the variables. So how could I even I don't know the method to use. Problem of the criterion. We're back to that. All these things are interlaced. They're all interconnected, because if I'm not given the standard, the blueprint for how to do something, then I don't know. I'm just like flailing in the dark. And it's scary, I think, for some people, because they truly think that we need to have all these secrets of the universe down. And I don't know why. I really don't. I mean, that's a whole separate topic, I feel like, because
why people feel the need to know.
And I think because deep down men, I think it goes back to the Garden of Eden. I think people, God says you can eat from all the trees, but that one over there, the knowledge of good and evil. And I think people, I don't know the good and evil part. I don't think it means what people think it means. I think it means like, you will know what it means to experience good things in life and really bad calamities. Evil was calamities, right? You're going to know. You're going to know, probably because I'm going to kick you out of the garden, because you think you know better. And we do. We think we know better. And we are constantly seeking out. And that's why people make up origin stories. That's why we have the Big Bang. That's why we have evolution. None of that is quote unquote scientific. None of it. Those are all cosmologies. And these are competing cosmologies with creation stories and those kind of things. And
the reason it can't be known, just for those who are listening, watching, like what we're getting at, again, please go listen to that previous episode first. But no one observed those. No one that is living and alive today actually observed those within the context of this lifetime. So you cannot possibly make scientific claims related to it.
Right. You weren't there, and you sure as heck can't manipulate the cause of the beginning of the universe. Therefore, it cannot be scientific by definition. At least if we're going to stick to scientific method. If you want to go with storytelling, well, yeah, all bets are off.
Right.
Then just hire some kids to come up with your best story. I mean, it would be just as good, if not probably better.
Probably better.
And
less conditioned, possibly.
Yeah, but we all do that, and kids do it every day. We use our imaginations, and we reverse engineer things we see in the real world effects that are real. We reverse engineer the story. And then people go, well, yeah, but that story works. Well, of course it works. You reverse engineered it to fit your already known outcome. Of course it works. Appealing to what works is a fallacy. Just because something works, just because a story is coherent, doesn't make it true. We all love fiction books, right? Those are internally consistent. If it's a good author, they know how to make it logically consistent with their premises. Doesn't mean their premises are true. It's fiction. Same thing with all these stories that you're told and these quote unquote theories. And that's what you start realizing when you start reading all these books on quote unquote science. They use the word theory completely different than how it's supposed to be used. We've talked about that. With theory is supposed to be after confirmation by experiment, right? That is not.
Repeatedly,
that's
by
right.
the way.
That's right. That is not how these people are using the word theory. They are freewheeling the word theory to mean my quote unquote best explanation for something.
Yep.
That word alone is loaded. Best explanation. Best according to what standard, right? We're back to that. I see that all the time. People go, that's the inference to best explanation. Oh, really? Best according to what?
Yeah.
According to what makes
mean?
According to what makes sense in your head.
Right.
Well, again, pick a number. Right. So all this stuff starts coming into play, and you can't get away from it. It's all interconnected, and that's why I think once you see that big picture and you understand the problem of criterion, the problem of begging the question, asking how do you know things, all this stuff starts unraveling. And that can be terrifying for people that thought they had a handle on the world. I was talking about this with my wife the other night. It reminds me of Tommy Lee Jones talking to Will Smith in Men in Black when they're sitting outside the building. And he says, all these people, they're not ready for, and they're talking about aliens, right? But they think they got a handle on the world. They think they got a beat on things, how they really are. And if you introduce this new thing to them, they're gonna panic. They're gonna freak out. It's kind of the same thing. It's the same psychological issue. We think we have a bead on these things that are true. And when you start unraveling that, people's whole world views fall apart.
You see it when you try to go to, this is an extreme example, but it applies across the board for the most part. You go to any molecular biologist or virologist and try to point out the flaws in their methodology and how could they possibly know what they know, and they just completely unravel. Or a physician, a pediatrician, especially on vaccines, they completely unravel. You kind of see that for those who are even somewhat paying attention to what's going on with the Epstein files release, right? Like the possibility that this is happening amongst the upper echelons of society for people who thought that was a quote unquote conspiracy theory are now like, oh my gosh, it's completely shattering their whole worldview.
And I guess it depends on who you are. Like for me, I think because I believe scripture and I believe things about our human nature. I think, we're not perfect. We're not God. We're all sinful. We have things that drive us to do the wrong thing, and some people more than others. And there is true evil, and there always has been. Again, read the Bible. People always use it like, oh, there's horrible things. Yeah, no kidding. That's especially when you get into nations and barbarism and the state and authority. The worst of the worst people seek those positions, and then all this stuff happens. And this is reality, okay? It's just the way it is. Anybody's ever watched Faces of Death back in the day, right? Like all these horrible things, war atrocities, like these things they're real. And so I don't really understand why people have such a hard time with that. But again, it just depends on how you were brought up and your worldview. And a lot of people are sheltered from that. And I think in America especially, we haven't seen a lot of hardship compared to some of these people in these other countries that have been 100%. War torn, and it's horrible. Even American Christians, we don't have a clue. There are some. I'm generalizing here, but in general, the standard of living for the poorest person in America is insanely high compared to other places.
100%.
And I know this is a different topic, but again, this is a worldview thing. These all play together. I don't even know where I was going with all this.
I have something I want to comment on as it pertains to like why it's so hard for people, as at least with the Epstein files and considering the reality that, or the position that you and I have come to, that corrupt people have a higher tendency to seek power over other people. So we should really question authority figures in government and the whole necessity of the state in general, is that many of those people have parentified government, right? They have parentified experts and authority figures. So they're outsourcing critical thought, outsourcing knowledge. I have a friend here, he's another West Point grad, and this is not meant to, talk badly of him or in any way, but we were talking about vaccines and he asked for my perspective. And I said, hey, here's my perspective. I shared exactly, what I shared, post on social media and things like this, and lack of validation for the foundational premises in vaccination across the board here on multiple levels. But when I relayed this to him, he's like, yeah, man, I've just like trusted what my doctor's saying. I'm like, see, bingo, that's the problem, is outsourcing critical thought to experts. And then people will be like, okay, well, you outsource critical thought to a car mechanic, and okay, you have to pick and choose is this useful? Has the car ever done me wrong? No. You know what I mean?
Brother, and I'm not trying to interrupt you, but I had this exact conversation 2 days ago in a podcast I did, because we were talking about medicine and why people will believe and what they believe and what they'll latch onto from medical doctors. And I started talking about how, because we were talking about how do you question your provider and how they know certain things.
Yeah.
And I said, you don't want to become a jerk, because like I gave the example of like the contractor coming to my house. And like, if every single thing he told me, I'm like, how do you know that? How do you know that? How do you know that? Over and over. Like, I'm going to piss a lot of people off, and I'll never get anywhere. The issue is that's different than your own body. That's different, right? A house, a car, plumbing, certain things like that.
Or your children's body especially.
I mean, really, yeah. When it comes down to your biology, things that can affect health, I think we need to be a little more discerning. So I do think there's a difference there. And you have to be able to truly ask, how do you really know that? And you don't even have to, again, put people on the spot and it be like a confrontational thing. It can just be like, can you give me a little more information? Let me think on it. I'll come back to you, whatever, but if they're gaslighting you, if they're ad homing you, if you mention vaccines and they just start throwing personal attacks at you, you need to run away. You need to find a different provider.
Well, it's clear that they're regurgitating what they were told, and they've not actually considered it at that point.
That's the point. And that's what we were talking about. I'm sorry, I get tangential.
No, dude, this is good.
But but that's the thing is like, and this goes back to all these issues of 2020 that sprung to life, is the philosophy of quote unquote, trust the expert. And it's the same with government. And I think, again, this goes back to me, one of the biggest issues in the world, besides the nature of us, is statism. Because look at the downstream effects of public schooling. And we are indoctrinated from birth to death pretty much, but especially in those first, 18 years, or not 18, until you're 18 years old, and even through college, so even more so, and then med school. It depends on what you do. If you do medical school, then you're even more indoctrinated. But we're indoctrinated to trust these people that basically raise us. Yeah. They become our parents. The government is our parent. The surrogates, in place are the teachers, and they're great people. A lot of these are, I'm not like, I think people
they have great intentions.
They have great intentions. Yep. They are hamstrung.
Just as people who join the military for the most part.
Exactly. They're noble. Like you said that the other day, and you're so true. They're noble intentions. The problem is once you get in and you see it, just like me and my wife and all the people, we went in wanting to help people. We have a genuine desire. But once you see the system for what it is, how do you stay in it? But regardless, in teaching it's harder, I think, because you didn't have back then, especially when we grew up, it's not as like the homeschooling and co-ops weren't as big a deal as they were now.
Yep.
Not that that's a good excuse, because people forever were taught at home and taught, you know what I mean?
Totally.
It's just in the last, couple hundred years really that all this has taken a nosedive, because you are renting out your own sovereignty to the state. And that is the issue. And so it's that parental, like you say, parentification. I think it was Kelly Brogan that once said, just call it, daddy government. And it's the truth.
It is.
We want our parent to be there for us. And instead of God, instead of relying on scripture, relying on God, relying on basic moral principles, that's just not enough for some reason. So we need this authority figure to tell us what to believe, what to think, what to do. And it's just bad.
It's interesting employing different cognitive frameworks, so to speak, for lack of a better term. I don't know if that's the right term, but when that happens, are you familiar with the Karpman drama triangle? Like victim, persecutor, rescuer?
Okay. Yeah.
That, and then the Hegelian dialectic becomes so prominent once you've outsourced authority and parentified government, because then you're split, because that individual that you're outsourcing authority to starts speaking about boogeymen on the quote unquote other side. So you look to them as a hero, you look to the other side as a persecutor, yourself as a victim, and then you're subject to the Hegelian dialectic over and over and over again, no matter which side you're on. And so the real mission is to step completely outside of that and see the game for what it is, and then make decisions based on that, which requires that you no longer are outsourcing your authority or looking to anyone outside of you, speaking to human beings, as a savior.
I agree. I totally agree. That is the crux of the issue, or at least one of them. I noticed that early on in my exploration into statism and collectivism and seeing the problems for what they were. I remember I was watching the show Lost, and it's brilliant how they got the others on the island, and they were bad. And then those others thought these other people were bad, right? They're scared of them. They're scared of each other because they're others. And then you realize they all end up hanging out, a lot of them at the end of the day, and they're like, oh, we're not that different. But it's a common theme in a lot of movies and books and stuff like that. But we just tend to do this tribalistic nonsense, and especially worse when you self-identify with the government that literally claims to own you, and then now you see that where people are saying, Iran hates America, and you're like, you're talking about the government? Or are you talking about the people? Because the people are not the government, at all. But again, we're brought up to believe that, and I know this has nothing to do with science or epistemology, but we're taught up to identify ourselves with the government, and they try to couch it in all these flowery terms of like government of the people, by the people, for. There's no such thing if it's not with consent. Like anybody can form a government that consents to it, but that's not how governments work. They take over people who don't consent. And then they spread that around the world to people who don't, you know what I mean? Like, so if we just got back to basic moral principles of consent, this would not even really be that big of an issue. I mean, it still would. You'd still have probably warring factions and things like that. But it'd be nothing compared. You'd have enough people that knew how to think straight and how to understand that they are responsible for themselves and their families. It'd be a game changer.
Yeah, I actually want to stay on this tip for a second because it relates to, I'll say this is why, as best as I can to explain why I've adopted sort of a voluntarist anarchist position, is because human beings cannot know with 100% certainty. That would imply to me, again, that we're operating on a bed of beliefs, every one of us. And because you cannot prove it, I think it is fundamentally immoral to take what is fundamentally a belief and try to impose that upon another individual or another group of people. And so the only political position that makes sense to me is one that is fundamentally apolitical. It's that politics is based on the idea, at least what we've seen so far, until someone comes up with a better version of it, I guess, maybe, if that's even possible, is that one subset of people's beliefs are being violently imposed onto another subset of people's beliefs. That's all it is.
That's all it is. And I always ask people on Facebook, especially, is like, and we talk, I do it in the sense of voting, right? Because if at the end of the day, I know everybody just has this like childlike mantra about voting. And then you go, because I'm a big picture guy and I'm a foundationalist, right? So let's go back to the foundations of what you're actually doing. Let's call a spade a spade. You think you're transferring authority to someone else to act in your stead to go rule over other people. Where did you get that authority? Where did you get the authority to then transfer to someone else to go rule over someone other than you? They cannot answer it. Not without being circular or tautological. They can't do it. And that's a big issue. And I love it, but I also hate it because people are so entrenched in it, they just get mad. Or they'll pull the Romans 13 defense on you, which you go, no, that proves too much. Now you can't tell me who is and isn't a legitimate authority over me. What's your standard? Problem of the criterion. What is your standard for who is and is not a quote unquote legitimate authority? Is it the local rapist who comes to me or comes to your wife and says, I have authority over you, lay down? Well, nobody would agree to that. So why is it okay for a group of people who label themselves, magic word, government, now it's okay? It's not. And so this is where principles come back in. This is where basic morality, and we have to agree on morality for any of this to work. Most people do, not everybody.
You know what people will say in response to that, because I've seen this, when people recognize that the voluntarist position is one that is based in, for lack of a better term, universal moral principles. I would like to talk about objective versus subjective morality towards the end of this, but most of us can agree that not imposing your will upon other people is a good thing. Right? Is the right thing to do.
Pretty axiomatic for most of us.
Right. Exactly. That's a good way to frame it. It's pretty axiomatic for most of us. But then they'll say, but it gets nuanced because society has corruption in it. And we need someone to lord over us. We need someone to provide safety and security. There's bad people out there, especially in the Middle East, radical Islamists who would come over here if we didn't have the protection of the US government. So I understand what you're saying, but pragmatically, it makes sense, which is why I voted for Trump, because he was campaigning on this. I'm just sharing some examples of what I'm getting at is there's a spectrum, maybe a spectrum of principles and strictly adhering to them, and then pragmatism. I just love to hear your thoughts on that. Well, it's more pragmatic to do it this way because it's, the ends justify the means, let's say.
That's what they're arguing for. And that's what utilitarianism, at the end of the day, pragmatism, utilitarianism is the ends justify the means. They don't. Not if you're principled. I mean, I got nothing else to say. And I think it's because I am so black and white on that. I'm not saying I live my life 100% by the principles. but I want to. And most people do.
You're a North Star.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep. And the anchor point, and pragmatics don't trump principles. Pragmatics don't trump morality. And I tell it to people all the time online and because they would never accept that in their own life.
Right.
They would never accept somebody. And because I tell them all the time, I'm like, okay, it's pragmatic for me to come to your house right now with a gun and threaten you unless you give me X percentage of all the things you own, because I've got some good uses for those in my mind that I want to do. You wouldn't accept that. Why not? Why not? What's your standard for rejecting that, but accepting all the crap that's done in your name by the state? That's my point, is that if you don't have a standard to even address this stuff, whether it's a standard to measure what your doctor's telling you against, or what a scientist is telling you, or what the state is telling you, or anybody's telling you, you're completely at the whims of whatever, of your own desires at the time. You're back to like those animal instincts, basically. This desire for, I need to be protected because of a boogeyman that I don't even know really exists. That's the other thing. We're told all this crap about radical Islam, and I'm not saying that radical Islam is not a problem, but it's not any bigger problem than radical Christian nationalism. I can't stand it. I can't stand the sickening stuff I'm seeing from people I used to look up to in the quote unquote Christian world. And I guess that's just part of growing up and studying these things out as you become more aware that these are just human beings, and we all have our blind spots.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
My wife and I talk about blind spots all the time. Some of us don't want to have blind spots though. I'm always on the lookout for that. And these are guys that should know better. Some of my heroes of the faith and philosophy, when you start reading about the things they say on politics, it's disgusting. And you're like, how did you miss it? How did you not go, okay, you're foundational over here, but you didn't go back to this foundation here? And I think that's the point of this discussion, is like, we have to be willing to question these things. And that's, I saw a post, a buddy of mine, Spencer, shout out to Spencer. He sent me a screenshot from some pastor. I think this guy's in Texas. He said, anyone who's questioning history, revisionism, is violating the 9th commandment. And I was like, you literally, your congregation should ask for your resignation right now.
Wow. Because
you're begging the question that all history is true and that anybody who questions it is a liar. First of all, asking a question isn't a lie. So you're already a moron. I'm sorry. Yeah. But just that's the kind of stuff I see all the time from these power figures who just basically encourage you not to ever ask questions. And the doctors do it. I see it on Facebook every day with these insane sponsored, I don't know why they're on my feed, of nurse practitioners or doctors saying, you need to trust somebody with, 10 years of experience instead of these influencers talking about, vaccine hesitancy. And I just want to be like, why do you think appealing to your credentials or your schooling has anything to do with the truth? Like, do you know what a fallacy is? Do you know what a non sequitur is? They don't. Right. And that's, again, the reason for this conversation is like, learn these basic things. Learn to spot fallacies. Learn how to ask, how do you know that? Just in a basic way. Think about foundations. Reel things back a few layers. Usually you can try to get back to the foundation. And even if you can't, you can tear down a lot of things too that way. You can falsify a lot of things, right?
Yes.
And back to what we were talking about earlier, and this is just a tangent real quick about correlation. That's what I do feel like correlation and correlation studies are better at probably falsifying things.
Yeah, like observations and meta-analyses, maybe like they can give us a good indication of what is not statistically relevant, meaning that it probably doesn't have a causal.
Probably doesn't. Because in my opinion, and I think you would agree, and most people would agree, if something is causal, it should also be correlated.
Right.
So if there's no correlation at all, and again, you get in the weeds with correlation because you're usually looking at two totally separate groups and looking at the differences. You can't compare different people. You can only compare yourself to yourself, and even then, variables change. So we're back to wouldn't know what the crap's
take in placebo, nocebo.
Exactly.
Too,
but the point is, back to the correlation stuff, is really, I do think you can help falsify that. But at the end of the day, yes, boy, statism just keeps popping up, doesn't it? It's the appeal to an authority that isn't a true authority.
I don't know about y'all, but I love bread. But basically, anytime I eat bread, I feel bloated, sluggish, and off, even if it's organic. It's how modern wheat is grown and processed. Most commercial flour these days is roller milled, which strips away the bran and the germ to extend shelf life. You lose natural fats, minerals, enzymes, and fibers of the whole grain. And because it's been stripped of nutrients, synthetic toxic substances like folic acid are added back through fortification. And I love sourdough, I really do. But even that leaves me feeling bloated and sluggish most of the time. So the issue isn't sourdough itself, it's the modern wheat behind it. Fermentation helps, but it doesn't fundamentally change the grain. You can't ferment your way out of an ingredient that doesn't sit well with your body. That's where pacha comes in. Pacha's bread keeps the traditional benefits of sourdough, but removes the wheat entirely. They use just two ingredients, sprouted buckwheat and sea salt. Buckwheat is a seed, not a grain. Naturally gluten-free, self-binding, no gums, seed oils, or industrial additives. By sprouting and fermenting the whole seed, pacha reduces digestive stress and makes the nutrients actually bioavailable. It just feels good in your system. They also use verified regeneratively grown buckwheat to help support soil health, and unlike many of the other clean brands out there, they're still independently owned and haven't been bought out by major corporations. So if you love bread but hate the bloat and sluggish feeling, and you want to support companies that are independently owned and doing the right thing for the earth, head to livepacha.com or just head to the show notes and use code THEWAYFORWARD for 10% off your order. Pacha is real food that actually loves you back.
Yeah, I think a lot of it goes back to that. And one more thing that I want to comment on with respect to the, like, principles versus pragmatism, again, spectrum. I don't know if that's appropriate to say, but am I going to say that there hasn't been moments in my life where I didn't strictly adhere to my principles because I felt it might be a little bit more pragmatic at that point to do something? No, like I've done that before. I've done that before. So I think there is maybe a spectrum there.
Well, here's the difference there's a difference between what is prescriptive and what we ought to try to be doing versus the reality of the world. And there are nuanced situations. There are dilemmas. There are moral dilemmas.
Like getting a driver's license. That's a perfect example. It's like, I don't want to have to do that. That goes against my principles that I have to sign a contract with an authority figure, blah, blah, blah. And there is possible ways around that. And I've discussed those, but the whole point is that's an example.
But the difference is you're not committing an immoral act by doing that. That's the difference. Yeah. It's one thing to, like I tell people all the time when they talk about, you use the roads, don't you? Oh, you use the license, you got a medical. Yeah, I do. Slaves ate from their owner's table because they didn't want to starve. There's nothing wrong with self-preservation. If they said you can only eat this if you go murder that guy over there, that's when it's wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a difference there. There's a difference in morality there between just abiding by someone who claims to own you out of self-preservation when you're not violating anyone else's right by doing that, versus going and actively being an immoral person. This is the issue I have with the people who try to, again, use the Romans 13 defense, saying you're supposed to submit to the state. And I go, okay, Jesus said we're supposed to turn the other cheek from an enemy. That doesn't mean what they're doing to us that makes us turn the other cheek is right. It's obviously not right. But these people are using that and flipping it and going, no, the government is right by default. That's why we're supposed to submit. No. A Christian is supposed to do it out of a servant's heart, and also out of not, especially again, the context back then was not be a rabble rouser and make Rome think that you're a new uprising that's trying to take over. It was pragmatic, but it wasn't immoral necessarily unless they told you to do something immoral. That's why Peter said, I have to obey God over men. They're like, yeah, respect the king, obey authority, be at peace with all people as much as it depends on you. Yeah. That's pragmatic.
That makes sense.
That doesn't mean you get to go start falling in line with what the state is doing. It doesn't mean you go sign up to be a Roman centurion. Doesn't mean you go sign up to be a tax collector.
Right.
Tax collector. You know what I'm saying?
Totally get what you're saying.
People get those categories. It's a category error all the time. And I needed to say that because that drives me insane.
I see that a lot amongst Christians.
Yep.
It's
horrible.
Really frustrating to see.
And their pastors are pushing it.
Yeah.
They don't know any different. I don't know.
One more thing on the principles versus pragmatism. Then I want to get back to a few more things with the scientific method. So I think that because so many people, again, don't even know what principles and standards and have not at least set a moral framework for themselves, what happens is they constantly choose pragmatism over principles, especially with respect to politics. And then what you end up with is what we have now, with this left, right nonsense that's continuing to widen, where we're continuing to get divided. And because people are willing to set aside their principles and go with what's pragmatic right now, like, well, the left was so dang bad, I don't agree with Trump at all. I like RFK, so RFK's joining along with Trump. I'm going to go ahead and vote for Trump because that's the pragmatic thing to do. And what we see happening is as we lean on pragmatism more than principles, things get worse and worse, more divided. Like that's ultimately what's happening here.
And even if they weren't getting worse and worse, because again, worse is a subjective term. True. You have to go, what worse, how? Because a lot of people, look at what you've been seeing lately. People are like, well, my 401k is doing great since Trump took over. And you're like, that's a pragmatic thing. Who cares? Like, yeah, great for you, great for me. That has nothing to do, that doesn't make me morally able to support the state. Those are two separate things. And as if your 401k couldn't do well without a government ruling over everything, you know what I mean? Or do you want your 401k to do well in this fiat system where money really doesn't even mean what you think it means. Like, it's all nonsense anyway. We're all part of that game. We can't escape it. And I get that. That's part of the whole living under these things as best you can. That there's a difference between doing that and being out there actively stumping for these psychopaths. That's the difference I see. You don't have the moral right to do it. And again, I always take it back to the individual level. I always have done this since I became a voluntarist. I remember doing it in 2010 at the gym in Odessa, Texas, when I was in medical school. And when I got in some argument with a guy, and I just used the moral individual example of coming over to his house and asked him these questions like, would that be okay if I did all these things? No. So why is it okay for the government? And why is it okay? And he didn't really have an answer.
And that's what I'm talking about, man. People go with pragmatically.
Yep.
Like, can I go to your house and demand money from you because I think it's best that I protect you?
That's right.
It's like, no, I don't need protection. Well, I think you owe me money, or I'm going to throw you in a cell in my
you
basement.
don't know better. I know better than you.
Right.
I know better. Daddy Jordan, let me tell you what you need. Okay, that's what psychopaths and sociopaths do. That's what these people are. I'm not saying everybody who works for the government is a sociopath. These people at the top, or the people that are even arguing for these things, or arguing for blowing up, people and collateral damage and all this stuff for pragmatic America first crap, they're sociopaths. Honestly, I really do think so. At the end of the day, and you see the bloodlust right now all over the place, and it's not new. I mean, we've seen this. It was the same around 9/11.
I think it's a strong indication when they change it from Department of Defense to Department of War.
There's the clown show going on right now is like, it makes me wonder how much of this is actual theater. Like this Hexeth dude, I don't keep up with, I don't know who these people are, but he's all over my feed now.
Yeah,
the things he's saying, it's like I'm watching The Simpsons or something.
It's so overt.
It's insane.
Yeah.
It's hilarious, but in a sick, dark, twisted way.
Yeah, it's like hilariously ridiculous.
Exactly. It's like, how could anyone sit here and watch this and cheer for any of these people?
Yeah.
Whatever side you're on.
Yeah.
It was the same with Biden. You're like, this can't be real. But it was the same with COVID. It was the same with watching people follow arrows in a store. And I mean, that's what was mind blowing to me, is like, I've known this stuff about the state. I've known this stuff about human nature, authoritarianism, in my mind. But seeing it play out like it did in 2020 and beyond, it's like, it's a whole new level of like, I think that's why we're so passionate now about this, but I know people have been passionate for a long time, but it's like, something's got to change.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. It's wild.
Totally get what you mean.
It's wild.
And so it's interesting. We were talking before we clicked record. I'll just give an example with what's going on in Minnesota, or what's gone on in Minnesota related to ICE, for example. Do I think that is going to happen en masse anytime soon? No. Do I recognize that that's like, relatively speaking, an isolated incident amongst a like vast sea of people where overwhelmingly it's not occurring elsewhere? Yes, like I absolutely recognize that. But what is concerning, and why like at some level I think it is important to have awareness of those things, is how the masses respond to it. And what you saw is people who are ostensibly freedom oriented, who I thought could see through the nonsense and the propaganda and adhered to principles and values, right? And a moral framework, cheering on what ICE is doing, which would indicate that if it were to happen wherever they are, they would not only turn a blind eye to it, they would justify it and possibly cheer it on. And that's why I like paying attention to what's happening on social media, because I recognize, man, that especially with platform like X, overwhelmingly, at least in my experience, they're just showing like constant doom, gloom, worst case scenario, division, just like all the worst things that are happening in the world, that are happening in certain spots of the world. But again, what's relevant there is how people are then responding, their perception, and then their thoughts and beliefs and how they act and what they say. And that's the part that's concerning, is how people respond to what's going on in the small pockets of the world.
100%. And yeah, just like we talked about before this, that was my big issue, and I was looking at some of the stuff like you were posting on Facebook and all these things. And a lot of the truthers are like, this is all staged, it's all fake. And I would respond to them and go, that doesn't matter. What matters is how these normies are responding. Your friends and neighbors are supporting murder, or even if it's not real murder, in their minds, that's a death. Yep. They're supporting it. That's insane. Yep. Because some people didn't fill out the right paperwork for the state. And I know they'll say, oh, they're violent offenders. Crime is crime. Doesn't matter if you're an illegal or legal.
I have some thought on that, by the way. This is the thing, is when they say that, well, they are criminals, they're conflating what you and I would consider a crime, like actually committing an act of aggression against someone, with arbitrary rules based on crossing a border from the state. Those are what's being painted as criminals. So yeah, you can say that all these people are criminals because they walked across a line.
Taxonomy. That's nonsense. Like, you can make a word mean anything, just like the government can call anyone a terrorist and all of a sudden they're a terrorist. And of course the normies would say, oh yeah, you're a terrorist now. Like, not until it becomes you, until they go, oh, you got a Bible? Yeah, we're going to throw you in a camp, right? Like, and then you go, whoa, you cry about it. Well, where were you? Jerk face back then when the illegals were being deported. It's just, I wanted to ask people that. I was like, because you see them try to collectivize and generalize the fact that, okay, some people who are quote unquote illegal have committed violent crimes. Yeah. Yep. How many people who are legal citizens commit violent crimes? Why does their quote unquote immigration status have anything necessarily to do with a true crime? It doesn't. So then I go, so you can't use that as your justification. So at the end of the day, you are justifying violence because people didn't fill out the right paperwork. That's what you're doing. You just admit it. Just admit it. And they can't. They won't admit it.
And then you're setting the precedent because you are advocating for it, where the next administration that comes in is able to do that exact same thing. That's what frustrates me the most, is people on the right are so blind to that. I'm like, do you not understand, by cheering this on, you are then creating the conditions where it's okay for the next administration to do the exact same thing?
To them.
Yeah.
To them.
Yes.
To you.
Yeah.
I don't even know what to say about it. And until we get back to, again, understanding personal sovereignty, and I'm not talking about sovereignty from God, I'm talking about human to human. Because a lot of people will try to conflate those things too. And I think because they do, a lot of, especially American Christians, they think the US government is like ordained by God. And I don't mean ordained in the sense that God's in control of all things, because I do believe that. I mean ordained like God gave revelation to these people to go rule over this country, to kill these Native Americans and take this land and do all this stuff. It's like, you're insane.
Some of my family members believe that, and dude, it is so wild.
Yeah. Well, they're taught that in church.
Yeah, man.
I mean, it's evil and wicked. And that's why I do think you are, I will say this, there's a glimmer of hope, at least according to my selection biases that I see online. Younger and younger Christians are, and a lot of people see it as a bad thing, leaving these churches in droves. I don't think it's bad.
No.
I think
you'll see them go to political rallies and like address this to various politicians and ask these hard questions.
And they're doing the same thing. They're finally seeing. The problem is they're going to alternatives that are just as bad. Just like we see in the health space, it's no different. People like, okay, they see this problem, but now I'm going to go over here to these people telling me this story. You got to just think and be critical about all of this. Don't jump on what sounds best to you. Go with like these principles we're talking about. And I think at the end of the day, you can be a little more discerning.
It's funny because I'd said on Facebook that I wanted to do a podcast where I have one right-leaning sort of MAGA person sit next to a leftist person and just try to have a conversation with both of them. I've had a few people now say, I want Jordan Grant there with you.
Saw that?
Do it.
It would be so like, it's so hard for me, because you just want to pause everybody and go, whoa, wait, right. And sometimes it's easier though, I think, in this, to have these discussions because we do focus on the principles.
Yep.
Because people need to step back and look at that big picture.
I agree. Totally agree.
That's what all this comes down. That's the whole reason we're doing this is be a big picture person when you can. Don't get sucked into particulars, especially when those particulars, a lot of them are just rhetoric and nonsense.
It's interesting because it kind of relates to like getting sucked into particulars. When it comes to health related claims, we get sucked into these supposed submicroscopic happenings too, which is really interesting. That's an interesting parallel there. That's funny.
Kind of what I was thinking about with this. I mean, originally that's what got me thinking about the particulars of the principles is you go, I'm going to go down these rabbit trails of antibodies and molecular markers and all this stuff. And you step back foundationally and you look into those and go, it's all moot. It's all crap. Because none of those things can be shown to actually exist at all in the way claimed. And we'll probably talk about that, but it's a heuristic that's very useful because once you see the recipes being used to make these claims, it's the same. It's just like virology.
Totally.
Same recipe, right? Well, it's the same for all this stuff.
It's hilarious because I've had a molecular biologist on X. Actually, I think it was a virologist on X. It was Thomas Baldwin, our homie Thomas Baldwin. When I said, I showed a picture of the scientific method and I said, what's that? And he agreed it was a scientific method. It was me and Mike Stone doing this to him. And then we were like, okay, what's the independent variable in virology? And as we continue to do this, he was sort of forced to shut up. And this was his response. If you think that virology is not scientific, then, because he couldn't, basically rebut what we were pointing to, he was like, you must then think all of cell biology is flawed. I'm like, yeah, that's the point.
Yeah, they think that's a gotcha. I had the same thing when I was doing, when I was on X or Twitter back in 21 or 20, when I met you. I had the same response. Oh, you must think electrons aren't real. Yeah. Yeah. Like what? Even most quote unquote scientists would agree that they're theoretical. Like
they literally say that overtly. They
say it.
Yeah, exactly.
So like that was my point earlier about these normie scientific communicators that don't actually know anything about the philosophy of science. It's like they've never read a book.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. So, but yeah, I think at the end of the day, once you see the big picture and are able to tear it down to foundations, it just makes life a lot easier to navigate these topics.
Yep.
So
totally agree.
Yeah.
So we've already established that because you cannot possibly control for all variables, nor can you even know what all the variables are. And then there's also the possibility that our own observation of the situation might have an effect. Like there's so many different reasons why the scientific method itself can't be followed. Yet, if you are longing to know what is the cause for an effect, have you thought of like any better thing to employ to try to figure out the cause for an observed natural phenomenon?
I haven't. And I rack my brain about that stuff all the time.
Yeah.
I say brain, my mind, because I don't think my brain thinks. That's my opinion. I don't think it's just chemicals in motion that are creating random thoughts.
Yeah, no, absolutely not.
But anyway, no, I don't know it. And this is a perennial, lifelong issue. The debate in philosophy circles about causation has been around for a long time. And again, there's a reason for that, because philosophically, it's impossible. The scientific method in and of itself, at the end of the day, and I don't like admitting this because, and I think I was never stumping for the scientific method for the reasons I think people thought I was. The scientific method is supposed to be the metric being used to elucidate cause and effect. They're not even trying to follow it. That was my point. It was being used as a hostile witness against those claiming science. At the end of the day, you're still stuck with affirming the consequent. If A, then B. If P, then Q. Q, therefore P. If this is the cause of that, then I will see this effect, or I'll reproduce this effect. I do reproduce this effect, therefore this is the cause of it in nature. I can't even know for sure if it's the cause of it in the lab. I mean, it probably is, but in nature, I have no right to make that claim.
That's the biggest piece that I think so many people miss when it comes to even arguing about what's happening, what is and is not quote unquote true in a laboratory environment, is you still have to make the leap to apply what's being done there to what happens in nature.
Exactly. This is all arbitrary. You have chosen certain things to do and certain things not to do. Who told you? Who told you? Who gave the recipe? We're back to that. Why did you make that choice? And if you go start looking at a lot of this, like, and we can get into this, but the chemistry is the other biggest hoodwink.
I actually want to share something with you real quick
Okay.
on that note, because you brought up chemistry. I screenshotted this and I forgot I wanted to show you because there's this chemist that I follow on X. I just want to hear what you have to say on this. Hold on.
That's the big topic, actually.
You're going to blow a gasket when I read this. Oh, man. Okay, so it's this chemist, this PhD chemist on X. His username, I can't see the full username, but his name, if you were to look him up, is Simon, I think you pronounce it Maekling. It's Maechling on X. This is his tweet. Spend 20 years studying chemistry, collect data, publish papers, earn a PhD, write patent applications, go online, get told you're wrong by an anonymous electric screwdriver salesman. That's the internet. Expertise versus confidence. Science isn't broken. Our respect for it is.
Dude, that's no different than the same post from doctors and stuff on Facebook. That's the same nonsense, like appealing to, I put in this many years and then I've got this credentials and then somebody comes along and says you're wrong. Are you wrong or not? Like that's all it comes down to. But that, first of all, it's not science. You're not doing science by doing chemistry.
This is what I responded to him with. Can you show how results obtained in highly controlled laboratory conditions are empirically demonstrated to translate directly to complex biological systems in nature rather than being assumed to? No response yet.
I love it. And well, I'm glad you brought that up. I'm glad we brought up chemistry because that honestly is, at least on the medical side of things, This is the biggest tyranny that we have because of the testing. Just like Dr. Sam Bailey says, we have an epidemic of testing, the lab testing. It's worse than I ever knew. And that's the issue I wanted to really touch on today, actually, was they are taking man-made stuff that they're creating. They're making all of this, okay? And then they are reifying that to say these are ontological realities of the world as is. Not only that, these are things going on inside of your body, and these processes that we're doing to create them, that's actually what's happening inside your body. And they'll draw out the little drawing, right, in the pathways, all the stuff we had to memorize in medical school. It's nonsense. It is all fallacious.
Can you give an example of that real quick?
I mean, you could take anything. We could take vitamins. We could take any kind of molecule. We could take genes. And I know people are going to think this is crazy. It's not. I started looking into this a couple years ago because my whole question was, and this was probably 3 years ago when I started reading a lot of these other papers besides virology, because virology started, piquing my interest about method. What are they doing? At a macro level, what are you doing? Don't feed me a story. Don't start inserting a lot of question-begging invisible entities. At the bench level, what are you doing that I can watch and observe you do? And then see what you've done and then hear your story about what you've done. I just want to know the macro level. Well, if you start looking at that and going, okay, how did they ever find out what a quote-unquote nucleotide was, right? Nucleotides are supposed to be these individual molecules that make up a gene. You have your A's, your G's, your T's, your C's. And substitute U for a T if you're talking about RNA. Doesn't matter. Go look it up. Go find out where guanine came from. They basically dehydrated a lot of batshit guano, and they came up with the word guanine. And that's apparently one of the quote unquote molecules that makes up the sentence of a gene that's supposed to code for a protein. Like none of this, you cannot manipulate a gene because you cannot show an individual molecule of anything, especially a nucleotide or an amino acid. Like what they have done is, and this is the recipe, we were talking about the recipe, right? This is what is done. If you go start looking into all of this, they take tissue, they do arbitrary things to it because they don't know what to do to it. So they'll boil it, they'll acidify it, they'll use solvents.
To extract DNA, for example, they do cell lysis.
Well, again,
which is insane.
You don't know that you're quote unquote isolating anything.
Exactly.
Because, okay, here's the philosophical side of that real quick. If I don't know what is in something to begin with, I don't know how to isolate anything out of it because I don't know what's there. So I don't know my end result is not something I just created in the process. That's what's being done. They are creating these end things that they then dehydrate into a powder or a crystal or whatever. Then they just make up a story that these are constituents of whatever. I don't know that that was originally what was done. I've tried to go back into some of the chemistry papers. This was a debate, and we'll get into this, I think, talking about what's called scientific realism versus operationalism. The realists assume that their stories they make up about these entities are true, whether they're atoms, electrons, photons, molecules, you name it, vitamins. Whereas the operationalists go, those are all convenient stories, but all that matters are the operations that we're doing and what can we do with that, basically technology. What can we get and then how can we use this in reality? The stories don't matter. You cannot make a claim that these are ontological realities. And I think even Einstein would have admitted that about all his stories, this bending of space-time. These are just fantasies they come up with. Einstein talked about imagination, the power of imagination. They're just ways to think about the effects you're observing. But in chemistry, the hoodwink is not with chemistry per se, it's with quote unquote biochemistry. That's where you get the hoodwink because chemists they're just doing technology. They're just making stuff. A lot of really bad stuff, that can hurt us, but a lot of good, cool stuff too.
There's useful stuff.
Yeah, this is not I'm not moralizing. I'm not saying that chemists are bad. There's a chemist that's in the no virus camp that somehow thinks that because we question his claim about atoms and molecules and all that we are deprecating his field. And it's like, no, that's a category error.
Yeah.
You know who I'm talking about.
Yep.
And he keeps using the word science, and then he tells us that we made up the scientific method. It's like, okay, dude.
Exactly. Well, yeah. And then when we ask him, okay, well, what is science according to you? I can never get a straight answer of what that is.
You'll never get an answer. You'll get fallacies.
It's like he almost appeals to his credentials in that case.
He does.
It's like, what?
or his experience in a lab. And I'm like, okay, I'm not saying your experience is not useful to you or something, but again, what is the standard that you're using?
Well, they do the same thing that people with like viruses stuff. They think, oh, if you deny viruses, you must think people don't get sick. It's like, no, that's denying the antecedent. Like you're fallacious. But these people don't care about fallacies. At the end of the day, though, they have taken and reified the operations that they're doing. And we could take anything. We could take cholesterol. This is a recent one that I was kind of looking into. Because, think about the claims made about cholesterol. Think about it, like all the nonsense. And you don't even have to go this route to kind of falsify the notion that cholesterol is causing heart disease. You don't have to go this route. But once you do, all this goes out the window. Because what my biggest issue in doing what I do for a living is I constantly get people freaking out about blood work. Lab work, and all these freaking influencers and bodybuilders and functional medicine doctors. It's like, got to stay on top of your lab work. You got to do these labs. You need to do this $1,000 comprehensive lab panel. Well, don't you think it's a good idea that we try to actually go in and validate what the meaning of these labs are? And because we did that with COVID, like with antibody tests, okay, it's the same thing. Antibodies don't exist in the way they claim. Nobody's ever seen these Y-shaped, all those receptors, none of that. What they've done is they've basically poisoned animals with something, and then they take their serum and combine it with yours, and they get a color change or a reaction. That's it. That's the operation. Okay, we're strictly sticking with the macro level. You have to assign a meaning to those things. Well, what do? They build a story about immunity, antibodies, what they mean, this, that, and the other. At the end of the day, it's all correlative. You don't know that any of these entities exist in the body like that. All you get at the end of the day are color changes or something similar. You get an output on a man-made device. It's the same thing with photons, right? They'll say, oh, the double slit. Okay.
I was actually going to bring that up as an example.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same nonsense. You're telling me seeing a blip on a screen represents an unmeasurable tiny particle? Where? How? How do you get that? You have no idea what's causing that blip on that screen. None. No idea. You've created that device without even knowing what the heck's going on with reality, so you don't even know what you're really looking for in the first place.
Based on preconceived story on top of preconceived story, like multiple layers of it.
Layered. That's how all this works. They build off of all these theories, quote unquote, that aren't real scientific theories, and they just accept them as true, and then they build on top of them. So that's why you have to take these things back to the foundation. You can't just accept what they say, and then they go, well, yeah, but it's because of this. And you go, oh, okay. No, how do you know that? How do you know that? So we're always back in the how do you know? But yeah, take cholesterol, and where they basically just have done something to tissue to eventually get this quote unquote waxy substance that you don't know if that was inside that to begin with, or if you just created it. You make a test, you use a chemical against that to get a color change. Then that color change becomes your calibration standard. You then take that reagent and apply it to human blood, and sometimes you get a similar color. They take the color change and go, that means you have this amount of whatever, nanograms per deciliters or however they measure it, of cholesterol in your blood. And it's like, but have you ever shown that cholesterol exists inside a human body in the way you're talking about? Well, they can't. You just can't do it because the assumption is that you can break the body down into these parts, but you don't even know what's there in the first place. And you don't know that the recipe you just did gives you anything that was there to begin with. And I think we talked about this in the first podcast. I don't remember. I know what goes into a cake. I know the ingredients. Can I unbake it? Can I pull out sugar? So why in the crap are you telling me that you don't even know what's in a human tissue and you can pull out these constituents of it? It is absolutely insane. But that's what they do. And the hoodwink is the lab tests that they've made against this thing they've created. So yeah, applying it to blood, you get a color change, but you don't know what that means because you don't know that that's specific for that thing at all. It could be a million things that cause that color change. You don't know.
This is the point that I tried to bring up when I had Dr. Zach Bush on. And I will say that it was cool because he shared perspectives that I did not expect, let's say, regarding the role of microorganisms and things like this, which I really appreciated actually. That being said, he started going on about genetics, and I started to bring up these exact same points regarding cell lysis and like what's done to a cell to supposedly extract DNA and RNA. And I used the example of like, I can see a human being. I already establish how a human being talks, walks, thinks, acts. But what you're doing is akin to taking a house without even an idea of what a human being is, grinding it up, extracting something out, and then trying to make claims about the characteristics and actions of that thing. That's what you're doing with quote unquote DNA extraction from a cell, which is what they use is, they use cell lysis and some of these other things in order to do that.
But they're still using chemicals and all these other things to get an end product that you don't know was there originally. We're back to what standard.
Yep.
What is your standard to compare your result with to know you got what you wanted to get?
Yep.
You don't have it because you're not God. You didn't create the cell. You didn't create the body. I create a cake and can't unbake it. You didn't create the body. You sure as crap can't unbake the body. And so this goes into the scientific realism versus operationalism issue, because this was a massive debate in the philosophy of science circles, and for good reason, right? I mean, it made me think I was crazy at first for even asking this stuff. But once you realize it's actually a very common sense type question to ask, how do you know that? Is the stuff you're doing, how do you know it actually, the story you've built is true about where this came from, what it represents, what it does in the body? The more you search and the more you look at, just go read the papers, read the methods. And I do that now with everything, every single thing. When a patient asks me about a peptide, okay, or some stupid thing to take like NAD+, and I go, let's go look at how it's made. It's just a coal tar derivative. They're going to tell you that's some constituent of your cells that does all this stuff, and they can use all this fancy molecular mechanistic nonsense wanking language. None of that can be validated.
Right.
You're just taking a chemical that some dude made. That's it. Go for it. Like, you may get a benefit, you may like it. I mean, we all, whatever. That's not the issue. But the issue is it's being sold to you like this is a mechanism in your body and you're deficient in, or you need it. It's like, can't be proven. And I will say the same thing about what I do with testosterone and with hormones. If you go back and look at the history of those things, when they first started looking at these tissues, they would literally just grind up testicles and like implant them into animals and get a virilizing effect, an androgenic effect. That's where all these terms came from, was from them doing stuff to animals. And then they give names to these effects they see, right? Like an estrogenic effect would like grow a uterus, right? Like they'd give a chemical and it would grow that tissue. That has nothing to do with claiming these things are inside your body working that way. That doesn't mean these lab tests aren't correlating with something real.
Right.
But here's the issue. You don't know what it is.
Right.
You can't prove it. So you're back to correlation. You're back to doing the best you can. So what I tell patients now is I think the best you have with lab work is if possibly you're able to measure the exogenous substance you are taking to get a blood level. Even at the end of the day, you're still correlating how somebody might feel based on that level. It's all correlation.
And it's subject to change the next day, maybe the next hour, maybe the next minute.
But when you go with these baseline levels of entities never proven to exist, I know testosterone exists as a man-made chemical, and that hopefully that's what you're measuring. I mean, you can see a noticeable decline after a certain half-life, all that stuff. That's a separate category from baseline levels of things that have never been proven to exist in the body as claimed. You might as well start flipping a coin as to the meaning of all that. And I tell people with cholesterol just because that's an easy one. And I go, look at all the people with perfect levels who drop dead of heart attacks and all the people with these scary numbers who live to be 100 and everything in between. And it's the same with all this stuff.
Yep.
So at the end of the day, that's why it's important to know this, because when your doctors fearmonger you about these labs, they don't have a clue that this is how this works. I will generalize that. I'm sure maybe there's some that have looked into this, but most people aren't going down these rabbit trails. No. They believe what they've been told about the meaning of these labs. They understand some stuff about correlation that's not perfect. They get that side of it. They don't understand the hoodwink that's been pulled over on people's eyes. And I'm not saying this is malicious. I don't know how this actually transpired through history. I don't know how we went from chemistry. And I feel like some people were probably honest since this was a debate back in the day, but it's like the insanity seems to always win. There's these debates that happen where the smart people go, wait a minute, guys, we can't go that far. We can't make these ontological claims about these entities. We can't claim atoms and electrons and all this, and we don't need to. We just go with our operations, and what can we do with that? And the other side goes, no, we need these to be real. This is reality. And that's what the realists did. They would say, if it's not reality, it's the closest approximation to, that's insane.
Man. Yep.
People don't have a clue.
It's a best fit model.
Best to what? Yeah, you can't know what's closest to reality unless you know reality. That's like saying, oh, it's most probable. Based on what? You can't know that something's probable unless you know the truth of the matter. And probability doesn't mean anything anyway. It doesn't tell you anything about the future. But that drives me insane when they do this inference to best explanation, or we're closer to the truth. No. That means you know the truth then. And if you don't know the truth, you can't say you're closer to it.
And this is interesting as it even applies to like falsifying things. Because I've said this before and I'm like, well, dang, do I actually know that? That when you falsify all the things that aren't true, what you're left with is closer to the truth. And I'm like, do you know that though? No.
Because you don't know the truth.
Right.
Yep. I've got friends, I used to probably think the same thing, honestly. And like, I've got a lot of friends that still use the whole Occam's razor thing. They're like, well, and it's like, that doesn't mean anything. Just the best or simplest explanation is the right one? No, you don't have, where did you get that standard? Who says because it's a simple explanation, it's right? Like, I can come up with a lot of simple explanations for things. Like, that doesn't have anything to do with the truth. Again, truth is a tricky subject when we're talking about like ultimate reality. You know, it's one thing to collate data, and that's where I think all of this went off track. Is they went from looking at the world, recording things, looking at the sky, recording the movements of stars. People always appeal to Copernicus and Galileo and Newton like they knew the secrets of the universe. You're just looking at lights in the sky and just like noticing patterns. That's it. All these mechanistic theories and stories are just that. They're just stories. And you got Einstein coming around and supplanting Newton. Newton was honest. Newton's like, I have no hypothesis for any of this. I have no hypothesis. He thought mass attracting at a distance was insane. But people took that like Newton said that was what happens, and then they just called it Newton's law of gravity or whatever.
What's so wild about that to reflect on, and I do want to talk about this just to get your take on it a little bit, and I'm going to give an example of the indication that adopting what is a fundamentally false or at least unproven story can still have, at the very least, measurable effects on our physiology. Like our physiology will quite literally express related to that story. What I'm getting at is nocebo, and then on a grand scale, mass psychogenic illness, mass social contagion. I'll give an example. I share this one all the time because it's just so revealing. So Daniel covers this in his book. In New Zealand, a drug had gone off patent, antidepressant. So a bunch of companies were able to make their own generic version of it. And a lot of people in New Zealand began reporting side effects related to this generic antidepressant. And there's 27 common side effects being reported across the board, right? Mainstream media decides to run a story on this, broadcasting this message to the masses. And for whatever reason, when they shared this story about this drug that's causing these side effects, they only shared 6 of the 27 symptoms that were being commonly reported across the board. What then followed was adverse events reports skyrocketed by like 470% only in the 6 symptoms that were named by the mainstream media. So there are countless other examples of this sort of indicating to me, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, that like, not only is it harmful to adopt false stories because you're not dealing with what is true, but it also is possible. Take, for example, someone who like fundamentally believes that when they get a cancer diagnosis, that is a death sentence, right? There's a pretty strong indication that that's going to actually have an effect to expedite that reality, right? And again, I can't say there's a direct causal link there, but throwing that into the mix when it comes to adopting any of these stories, whether it's about cosmology, like any of them, especially those that are disempowering. And then again, that goes back to like, even if it's not disempowering, is it still true? And like, what is your like North Star, so to speak? But yeah, I'd just love to hear your thoughts on that.
That's a tricky one because it still falls under the same issues as everything else we're talking about with proof.
Yeah.
And so we're still stuck with, I think that's probably a thing. Can I prove it? Because if you're using those kind of statistics, if you look at drugs and what they report as quote unquote side effects, because of liability stuff, they have to report, even if one person in a trial experienced something, they have to report that. And they have to claim it might be caused by that drug when it may not have been. So you're already kind of starting off with like, well, you don't even know if the drug was what actually caused that negative effect in the first place. Now, if you have a massive difference between your control group, is it reasonable to go, okay, maybe we should be cautious and go, that's probably maybe causing that? Because I do. I think it's, again, we're speculating, but we're using our senses and we're using our observational skills. It doesn't mean we know.
If you listen to this show, you are probably well aware that there's something seriously off with our modern food systems. And even a lot of food labeled organic isn't what it seems. Some of it's shipped in from China where regulations are murky at best, and other times companies slap the USDA organic label on while cutting corners and doing the absolute bare minimum in order to achieve that label. That's why Dr. Cowan's Garden exists. Founded by Dr. Tom Cowan, they believe health starts with food, real food. the way that it's supposed to be grown. They call their sourcing beyond organic, which means they're working with small family-run farms who are going above and beyond the USDA organic label when it comes to growing their food. These farms care deeply about soil health and nutrient density, and some are even biodynamic certified, the highest farming standard in the world. At Dr. Callen's garden, they use proper processing techniques that humans have used for thousands of years because they actually work. Nuts and grains are soaked or sprouted just as traditional cultures did. Olive oils and apple cider vinegars are never heated, preserving fragile nutrients. Olive oil is protected from light because oxidation matters. The list goes on and on. The products at Dr. Callen's garden are made to be deeply nourishing and also incredibly delicious. Foods that you actually enjoy eating and foods that make healthy decisions actually feel good. Dr. Callen's garden is not about fads, it's not about fear, and it's definitely not about following government health recommendations. It's about reclaiming a simple trust in your food. If you value transparency, tradition, and food that respects both your body and nature, head to drcallensgarden.com or just head to the show notes and use code THEWAYFORWARD for 15% off your first order. Welcome back to Real Nourishment. It's interesting though to get a 470% spike just in those 6 symptoms.
Well, because I think there is something to people start seeing what they want to see and looking for things.
That's my point.
Yeah,
that's my point. Like they orient their whole life around that story. And like, it is just wild to think that your physiology can actually relate to that. Take the examples of just after the Spanish flu, when people were given a saline placebo, thinking they were getting fluids from a sick person, they actually expressed physical symptoms related to the original disease in question, despite not being actually exposed to fluids from a sick person at all. Like that is crazy to me.
Yeah, if that's the causal link. And again, I agree with you. My belief is that that's a real thing. Just like you look at, I think Daniel talked about the cancer thing where they gave people saline that they thought they were getting chemo, end up having the exact same, issues as chemo can give. And it's like, do you ever really see saline do that? I mean, obviously injecting saline, we think it's benign. It's probably not.
No, it's probably not.
But do you get true chemo type effects from that? Never really seen it.
Yeah.
So the fact that those kind of things pop up makes you scratch your head and go, I do think there's more to the psyche and our belief system and how it plays out in our body. And I've experienced that just, we were talking about gut issues before we started. And even now, even in the normie world of functional medicine and all this, there's the gut-brain axis and all this. I don't think it's gut-brain at all. I think it's mind and gut. I think it's our emotional state. And this is where I do think
because mind is not synonymous with the brain. I see what you're getting at.
Exactly. Yeah. It's deeper than that. But I do think, and this is where I think German New Medicine, gets a few things right. I just don't think their stories are true.
I don't think it's absolute either.
No, it's not. It's not absolute. So there's more going on than we can possibly know. But I do think the emotional state, especially for the gut, my gosh, we all of us know, quote unquote, have been there when we get suddenly scared, nervous. I remember as a kid, mom and dad didn't come home for a while or something. You start worrying, you start having diarrhea right away.
There's a reason that's a term that people say you shit your pants.
That's
when
right.
You're scared.
Yes, exactly. Or you piss your pants or whatever. Like people have known forever about the gut and emotions. Like they just have. Like there's something weird about that. And you can start talking about neurotransmitters and sympathetic. It doesn't matter.
See, it all goes back to like, okay, there's a clear effect here that we're observing where someone gets scared and then they like a lot of people.
Yeah. But do we know why?
Right. Exactly. Applying a story to it. That's the thing, man. Especially getting into like the molecular details. You have no freaking clue. And the reason that matters, because I could see where people would say, well, like, what does it matter anyway? Like, how is it harmful to come up with these stories? It's harmful because then we talked about this on the last episode. It results in obviously all the measures with COVID, but you could even take aside from that example, like if you think that this gene is strongly linked to this type of breast cancer, then you have women who quote unquote test positive or express quote unquote that gene, preemptively getting their breasts cut off to defend against breast cancer. That is insane.
Yep. It's insane. That's the one example I like to use because people can identify with that. In fact, the gentleman I did the podcast with 2 days ago, his stepdaughter did that. He tried to talk her out of it. I mean, it's just that, but they believe it. They believe this story. And the fact that doctors, you're recommending this, don't you want to do your due diligence and go, do I really want to go and look and see if these genes actually quote unquote exist firstly, or even cause? How did they prove cause with any of this? They didn't. You're correlating. You're using correlation to push people down pathways that are harmful. And that's my problem with blood work because of the fear factor that people get when they see a blood marker, quote unquote, out of range or in the red. And then they go to their doctor, and their doctors fill their head full of sawdust and full of crap that they need to go have this, and this test done. And then those tests lead to more things that nobody knows what the meaning of the findings are, but they've had these diagnostic tests that can lead to issues. I had a good friend of mine, and I don't think she'll mind me telling the story. I won't name her. About a week before Thanksgiving, they messaged me. She was already in the hospital. She started turning yellow, getting jaundiced. And she goes to the hospital or goes to her doctor first. And of course, her liver, quote unquote, enzymes are through the roof. Because we can correlate those with liver damage. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, does it mean it every time? No. But yeah, there's something going on. Obviously, she's yellow, so there's something going on. And they try to link it back to she'd taken some Bactrim maybe like a month before. Again, there's speculation. I was like, yeah, it could have been, whatever. But when she gets in the hospital, they start freaking her out about these levels. And they want to do a liver biopsy on her. And I go, okay, whoa. What would that change? They can't treat this. There's no medicine. There's no drug. There's nothing for a liver injury except time. But they want to stick a needle in your liver, possibly causing either a hemorrhage or a bile fistula. Can you imagine? Nobody wants to ever experience a bile leak. It is horrific. So the fact that they were pushing her to do that, and then thankfully, they reached out and I was like, it's okay. And I looked up, it'd been a while since I looked up liver injury, and I remembered about the timing of these markers and what they do, because her bilirubin kept going up. And I was like, you look it up, you're like, yeah, that happens for like a while after a liver injury. Your bilirubin will continue to go up even while your enzymes start to come down. It's just part of it. It's just the way your body kind of heals. And so she, they finally got out of the hospital. They wouldn't even let her leave, even though they can't treat it. They're doing nothing. They're just sitting there checking her levels every day for no good reason, trying to tell her to take a biopsy. Thankfully, she doesn't do that. They go home. And then they keep checking the enzymes. And I'm like, you got to stop checking the enzymes because, you just got to wait this out. After about 3 or 4 weeks, I think the enzymes start coming down pretty good. She goes to see the doctors. They still want to do a liver biopsy on her. So that's my point, is like these levels will cause these doctors to absolutely freak out, because at the end of the day, and I know I'm not trying to like generalize all doctors like this, but at the end of the day, they're not thinking about what these things truly mean. Right. They're not thinking about meaning. They're not thinking about the philosophy of the methods that got them here or that got those tests where they were. They don't explore any of that. And I get it because they don't have time. It's not a good excuse though. You know what I mean? Like it's just not.
It's people's lives and health. So
exactly. And that's the issue with the whole allopathic system in general. And Dr. Kaufman, Andrew, he posts a lot about this on his Instagram about these tests and diagnostic tests and where they're going to lead. And he's right. 10 years ago, I'd have been like, oh, this guy's crazy. Probably not, because I even saw it in
that's what I was going to bring up with you though, because you're unique in that you had a lot of philosophy training prior to going to medical school, where most people don't.
Oh, I was outraged through so much of medical school.
I can't even imagine.
Dude, when we're in histology and they're showing these electron micrograph images and little arrows pointing to this is that and this is what it does, and I'm going from the consequent. You don't know that. Even then I'm doing that, but. Did I still kind of buy the whole virus? Yeah. Because again, at some point you're like, I just got to memorize this stuff and get through it.
Yeah.
I still thought the virus thing was absurd because they were always like, it's a virus, but we can't treat it. But here's some antibiotics anyway. And you're like, what? I don't. And
I thought you said this is not a bacteria.
This is a latent virus. And so in some people, it just lays dormant forever and then it'll activate when they're 40 years down the road. And you're like, this is just weird.
That's what they told Kylie, my wife. They told her that she had, like, when we started looking into more holistic reasons why she had, quote, autoimmune conditions, they were like, oh, she had dormant Epstein-Barr virus that most of us have that was activated. And because you started eating more clean and spending more time in nature and moving your body more and dealing with your emotional stuff, the virus just went away because the body's conditions were better. I'm like, isn't it just like more appropriate to say that she had some sort of toxicity and deficiency, probably, that once you dealt with that, her body started expressing health better?
But they need the placeholders, right? These are all imaginary placeholders. And again, it goes back to the whole question of like, why does it matter? It doesn't matter if it's not going to change what you end up doing.
Right.
It doesn't matter because you just got to do what you got to do. What matters is when the stories lead to these other things that send you down a pathway that is going to harm you. That is my big beef with the storytelling. Is it as big a deal with the whole atoms and electrons and all that thing? I don't know. It might be, it might not be. The problem with those is that is a bigger issue from a worldview perspective because it's reductionistic materialist.
That's it, dude. That's the exact thing. Because I think it would be hard to assess how much of an impact that has on society. Because again, it's not even about the atoms and electrons. I'll give you an example. Like I made this link, and I'm not saying that this is universal. I'm not saying it's applicable across the board, but a lot of the people who have come to understand the no virus, quote unquote, position, the lack of evidence behind the germ paradigm, also tend to adopt a worldview, a political view that is more voluntarist. And I previously thought that it was largely because we're willing to go to the depths to address the premises of these things. And I think that is a piece of it, right? But I also noticed that it's a worldview of fighting versus a worldview of harmony. Like, because the germ paradigm is based in that the body needs to fight these things in order to achieve health. Likewise, the statist perspective is that we need to fight to get this person in office. We need to fight to keep that person from getting office. We need to defend against these foreign invaders, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's also based in a worldview of the best way to achieve health or freedom is through fighting. So like it all comes back to worldview things with the atom thing, with the electron thing. It's based in materialism, obviously. Like that is the biggest piece there that sticks out. And I don't know what the effects would be in a world of people who no longer have a materialistic worldview as their predominant axiom again.
But that is the issue. And when you start looking into the history of science, especially medicine, germ theory especially, all these things are tied in with evolution and with these cosmologies that are bigger. It's a religion. These are religious beliefs.
Yeah,
and people act like they don't have, everybody has religious beliefs. Yep. Everybody.
Atheists do too.
Atheists, absolutely. Like we're back to belief. Everybody has beliefs, and that's what they say. Religion is just belief.
It's even more hilarious to like believe that something came from nothing.
Well, and
that's
again,
hilarious.
They don't live out that worldview. They don't live out consistently that worldview. Some might. They're called serial murderers.
Yeah.
And they don't have a conscience. At least they're consistent. I mean, really, give them props.
True, yeah.
I do. I appreciate logical consistency.
Yeah.
If you're going around and you're talking about right and wrong, and you're saying everything's random from little billiard balls hitting each other, and your own thoughts are the product of that, then you have no basis for saying anything true or false, anything right or wrong at all. You just need to shut up. I mean, really. But they'll take it a step further. They make more moral claims than any people I've ever seen. It's wrong to indoctrinate your kids into Christianity. Wrong? Wrong why? What's your standard? Why is that wrong? Because you feel it? Like that's not, you can't base morality off of how you just feel about something.
Right.
You know, or Christian, this, that, or religion. Look at all the wars. I'm like, dude, you ever looked at the state and how many millions? Look at the 20th century alone. According to quote unquote history, bloodiest ever.
Yeah.
All from statism.
Yep.
And all from atheistic worldview, mainly from communism, which was pure, Karl Marx was 100% Darwinian, like evolutionary, like all of it, you know, all this. But yet he made ought claims all the time. Mm-hmm. He talked about the classes and all history is just this mechanistic history of class warfare. But yet he thought there was some reason that should change, for the better, so the proletariat could rise up against the bourgeoisie. It's like, why? Why does that need to happen? What's wrong with the proletariat being, you know, under the bourgeoisie? What's wrong with that? Why is that wrong? Well, they can't answer that, right? They just don't like it. It's a preference. Well, preference doesn't determine morality. Anyway, separate topic, but we could always talk about morality too. But all these things are intertwined. This is why I've always been fascinated with worldviews and like Christian worldviews for me, you know, but that even encompasses like, what does that even mean?
What is that? Right.
Because there's so many different beliefs about the Bible. I mean, I am at odds with the majority of Christians on what I believe about certain things.
Real quick, I actually want to talk about this a little bit. I want to hear why you have come to believe the partial preterist perspective.
Well, I'm not even a partial.
Are you full preterist?
I'm full.
Okay, I want to hear like your thoughts on why.
So for those who don't know what preterism is, I guess we should define that. And this is probably a lot of people are not going to believe that
because I'm at least partial, by the way.
Yeah.
Like that's where I stand too. Yeah. Like I still
And I'm not saying I have all the answers. I don't even like the labels. I'll just tell you that. I go with like, what can I deduce from scripture?
Yep.
And the rest is up in the air. So preterism, and everybody is a preterist. Preterist just means past. It means things that happened in the past. every Christian is a preterist in some form because they believe all this stuff that happened in the past, right? What it comes down to is the quote unquote second coming of Jesus, right? Is that everybody's waiting around for this end of the world cataclysmic thing where he comes back and kills all the enemies and recreates the earth and we all live in a utopia on earth. None of that's biblical. It's just not. And I was brought up believing that. I got into the whole like dispensationalism, Left Behind stuff in high school. Even though I didn't really read my Bible. So
I used to read the Left Behind series.
It's terrifying to me.
Yeah, dude. I used to be so scared.
It's insane.
Especially like thinking like, am I good enough to get into heaven? I used to be so afraid of that,
Oh man, like legalism in the church that's a whole separate topic. But the legalism and dispensationalism really do actually go hand in hand. And dispensationalism was sort of a theology that sprung up, I think in the 1800s when a lot of the American church movements sprung up. They were all tied into the whole like manifest destiny. You can do it, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's very works-based, very legalistic, very like earn your way to heaven type stuff. And you can see that with a lot of denominations. But dispensationalism, I think it was Darby and Schofield Bible, came up with this crazy futurist system about the second coming, but not the whole Bible. They like basically raped it. I mean, honestly, like people can go look into that. But this idea about the second coming, right? Like it scared the piss out of me at the time. And I didn't read my Bible. I'd go read Revelation, but not having any context for it, right? Mm-hmm. And so you're like scared to death. And they'll try to say that all these things are in the future and those things in Revelation really are like, those are helicopters and those are this and that's nuclear war and all this. Well, if you just go read your Bible, start to finish in context, you start going, a lot of this stuff is not what I was taught. And I'll never forget this. And I think I was around 24 years old when I started reading my Bible by myself for the first time on my own and trying to just figure stuff out. And it was like a paradigm shift for so many things, but I'll never forget reading the Gospel of Matthew because Matthew's, the first book of the New Testament. And you get to Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24. And up to that point, Jesus has already said a few things that you're going, that's interesting. It's like he's telling the disciples, like, you will not finish going through the cities of Israel before the Son of Man comes. All these things. And you're like, huh, that's interesting. What does that mean? And you get to Matthew 24 and they're leaving the temple and the disciples point at it and they tell them, they're pointing out the building because this temple was amazing. Like this thing was supposed to be like one of the world wonders at the time. Herod's temple. And they're pointing out the temple and the stones and just how awesome it is. And Jesus is like, you see all this stuff? There's not one stone on here that's going to be left. And the disciples go, Lord, tell us, when is this going to happen? And what will be the sign of your coming? They already knew to associate his coming and the end of the age, not the end of the world, the end of the age, and tell us when these things will happen. And then he gives this big spiel to them about what they should look for. And then he says, eventually, when you see Judea surrounded by armies, you get your butts out of here, flee. Does that sound like the end of the world? Would you flee a city if he's coming back to blow up the quote unquote planet? No, not at all. So they understood what he meant. He said, nobody knows the day or the hour, but he did give them the time frame. He said, this generation, meaning them, will not pass away until all these things take place. Now,
and modern Christians have taken that statement to mean he's speaking generally to like the generation of Christians that come afterwards.
It's insane. What's worse is what the dispensationalists took it to mean. They changed the word generation to race. The race of the Jews will not pass away before all these things take place. Insane. First of all, nobody can prove they're a descendant of Abraham. Okay, there is no. You cannot prove you're a Hebrew. Okay, you want to go into genetic stuff and all that, but you can't do it. There is no more Old Covenant Israel. That ended when Jesus said it would. AD 70, when the Roman army came, and 3.5 years, go read Josephus' War of the Jews. It's like you're reading Revelation. It is insane. Josephus is not a Christian.
You said AD 70 specifically, right?
Yeah, around that time.
Did I talk to you about that, the whole like 1776 thing?
Yeah.
And dude, it's like wild to think about,
honestly,
man.
I'll just say this, let's sum this up and then I'll talk about that.
Sorry.
So that was sort of like, oh crap. And then there's all of the discourses in all of the synoptic gospels. It's in Mark and in Luke, and they all are pretty similar. There's a few details, like Luke gives a little more detail about this, that, and the other, but it's all the same stuff. And you start going, okay, that's interesting. And then you learn about AD 70. I'd never learned about AD 70 ever. And I was like, well, that's wild. And then you start reading the epistles. You start reading Paul's letters and Peter's letters. They are littered with time statements, left and right, that all this stuff was coming down on them. The time is closer. The time is near. All this stuff. And you're like, holy crap. And then the first opening phrases in Revelation is like, these are the things that must shortly come to pass. All this stuff. And then you start reading Revelation, and if you know your Bible, which I haven't known my Bible well until the last few years of reading the Old Testament and understanding how the prophets talked, the language they used, most of that language is taken and used in Revelation because that's how they understood what that meant, the prophetic language, right? And a lot of it's symbolic, but most of Revelation, they tell you what the symbols mean. You don't have to speculate. They give it to you. Here's what these mean. Here's what these stars mean. Here's what the lampstands mean, all these things. But all of that, if you read it and you understand that this was all coming down in context of the temple coming down, and you see like the harlot riding on the beast, well, that's Jerusalem tied in with Rome because they were, Rome was controlling it all, but they were basically whoring themselves out. And they always had. And I'm not saying all Jews. I'm saying Israel, the leaders. And that's who Jesus was hammering, right? Go read Matthew 23 and the woes against the Pharisees. He was hammering them because they were laying burdens on people that were never there to begin with, right? Their traditions were they were usurping God, just like these stories do now. It's no different.
Jesus was showing direct access to God outside of the context of an authoritative body.
Yeah.
And it was a direct threat to what they were trying to do. It
absolutely was. And it's not that the old covenant system, this is where a lot of my preterist friends get it wrong, and they see the old covenant itself as evil. It's like, no. Jesus was still all about, at the time, before it ended, he's like, even when he healed somebody, go show yourself to the priest. Go show yourself. Do all the things you're supposed to do. It's not that those things were evil. It's that it was temporary. It was always temporary. And that's what a lot of Christians don't understand. The dispensationalists flip it around and they say the Christian age is the temporary age. They're waiting for the temple to be rebuilt just so Jesus can come back and whatever, that sacrifices again, even though that he was supposed to be the final sacrifice, right? But what is the truth was the old covenant system was always temporary. The Abrahamic covenant was always bigger than just Hebrew. It was always more than ethnicity. It was always, that's why he said, that's why Paul talks about Abraham being, given the covenant before circumcision. Because the Jews, and especially when the early Christians, and you read Paul's letters, they were being pressured to be circumcised because it was like being part of the club.
Yeah.
Like you're not going to be, because these were Christian Jews that were praying. These weren't non-Christian. These were Christian Jews that were saying, no. If you want to be part of the Jewish, our God, you got to get circumcised. Paul's like, no. That's not how it works. Abraham was a child of faith before he was ever circumcised, not after. Circumcision is not what, that was just a sign. That was just something you do like a gang symbol, right? Like a tribal symbol, whatever.
It's crazy how much that's trickled into culture across the world.
But I mean, you're just showing yourself as separate from the nations, and God had a reason for doing that, to say we're different, right? We're not going to be participating in your child sacrifice and all this stuff. They did anyway, and then they got exiled by Babylon, right? Anyway, a lot of stuff here. Preterism is the belief that all these things regarding what Jesus said about his coming have already taken place. That does include talking about resurrection of the dead. And this is a whole big topic because people, I think, don't understand what that means.
Resurrection of those who've died in Christ specifically,
So it's not, because it was the resurrection of both the just and the unjust.
Oh, okay.
It was basically, and this goes into
Actually, no. I was incorrect on that. I knew that it was both those who are...
They do talk about the dead in Christ rising and all that in Thessalonians, but the idea of resurrection, and this is what most Christians, I think, get wrong. And again, I'm appealing to history here and a lot of stuff that we can't validate.
And I appreciate that about you, because you're willing to acknowledge, like, this is all belief.
Oh yeah, this is my belief, and I believe what's clear. The rest is like muddy, and I go, I don't know. You cannot get away. But here's my problem with this is the people that argue against this, they do it out of speculation and out of what they want to be true. They never focus on the fact that the time statements are clear. You cannot escape. If you believe the Bible, if you do.
You see, goes back to the axiom thing.
That's right.
Like, is your
this
axiom...
is my axiom. My axiom is scripturalism. Yeah. If I believe it, and Jesus said it's going to happen in that generation, and everybody else did, it had to happen. It doesn't, because they'll try to appeal to arguments from silence. Well, it wasn't recorded in this. You don't know what was recorded and what wasn't. Back to what you're talking about with history, we have no idea.
It could have been totally manipulated.
Totally.
Like, people could have thrown all the recordings away.
And here's my speculation on this, and I'll just say that. Well, let me get real quick on the resurrection, because I think people need to hear this, because this is a big topic that I've just started studying the last few years, is the idea of resurrection from the dead. People think that means bodies coming up out of the grave. That's not. The dead, the belief in the realm of the dead was the same as the Greeks had, was that when they died, everyone went to Hades, to Sheol, to this holding place. They didn't go to heaven. They didn't go to hell, whatever hell is, right? The lake of fire. No, they went to Sheol. The belief at the time was that nobody comes back from there. That's why it was so incredible to the Corinthians, who were not, they were not Jews, they were pagans. And I don't say pagan derogatory. I mean, they were pagans in the sense of believing all this other stuff, these other gods. their belief, they were incredulous that Paul was teaching a resurrection out of Hades. They did not think, other than unless you were a great hero or Jesus, you cannot come out from there. So they were denying that resurrection out of Hades. And Paul said, no. If you deny that, you have to deny that Jesus died and came back, because it's a one-to-one linkage. If Jesus did that and defeated death, these people that you're worried about, your loved ones that have died, they will be raised. So that's what the resurrection is. That's the big argument against preterism. Is they say, people didn't come up out of their graves. And so, it's like, well, that wasn't what the resurrection was about. It was about the afterlife. It was about freeing people from that realm to then go and go to heaven, whatever that means, right? Like, I don't know. We're not told about the details on all that. It's all story time and all that. But that's sort of my belief, is that those things had to happen because I believe the Bible. And I know that sounds like arrogant or something, I guess, but it's like, no, that's my belief. I believe that happened. I think Jesus said it. It's clear. Go read Josephus' War of the Jews. If we believe that history, I mean, yeah, sure, it could be fabricated. It's not a one-to-one with biblical. He's not a Christian. You can tell when you read it. I mean, he was not transcripted, but he was under the Roman authorities, right? But a Jew and was a historian for them of their war. Go read the War of the Jews. It is like you're reading Revelation. There are signs in the sky. There's armies in the sky. There's all kinds of stuff. Here's what I wanted to say real quick about this. My belief on this, and this is total speculation. When you read certain things in the New Testament about the end, it does sound very cataclysmic and very weird. I honestly am not, I've told this to my friend Spencer. I'm like, I think there might have easily been some kind of great reset. I think it was bigger than what we think. I think when all this happened, we don't have a clue after that fact what true history even looks like. Dude, just like you were talking about. Yeah. I totally believe that. I don't know it. It doesn't matter. Right. Like, and a lot of people like freak out about this because their hopes and dreams for some reason are tied to this future second coming, even though they know they'll probably be dead and it doesn't make any sense.
Well, it all goes back to the worldview thing, right? This is what I see so much amongst those who follow me that are Christians that believe that type of stuff, is that it doesn't matter. It's all going to shit anyway. There's nothing we can do about it. We just need to wait for Christ to come.
Why polish brass on a sinking ship?
Yeah, exactly.
It's horrible. It's a horrible worldview. And that's what dispensationalism has done. But honestly, futurism in general has done that. Not all of it. There are forms of people who are still futurists. They're kind of on the flip side. And it's a lot in the Presbyterian community, Reformed community, where they're called theonomists. They want Christians to take over the government on the earth. That's what they're waiting and take dominion, right? I don't want to get into that. I can't stand it. I think it's a lot. They have a lot of good libertarian type views, but then it goes too far. But the opposite is the whole like, why does it matter Jesus is coming back? It's like, so what if he comes back in 2,000 years? How does that affect you today? So you're saying you shouldn't speak out against any evil today or do anything to make your community better? Like, right. That's insane. And that's not biblical view. Like the biblical view is still to uphold justice, show mercy, protect the orphan and the widow. Like these basic principles, people have overcomplicated it so much.
Yeah.
And I'm just now starting to really realize that because I swing back and forth from the high theology side to go, no, wait a minute. What's the practical side? How do I live this out? How do I live out a worldview? And if you have all these beliefs that you can't even live out a worldview, what is your point?
What is the point of them, right?
What is the point?
Yeah, see, this is where it goes back to, for me, like questioning conditioned beliefs. And again, we all have to acknowledge that we have beliefs. I think that is like the starting point, that we're all operating on a bed of beliefs. And that's okay. And then it becomes, are these beliefs making my life better? Are they making me a better person? And you also have to define what is better. You also define what is a good person, but like have those starting frameworks and then build from there. And this is the part that's wild. And I talked with you, I think like a year ago, I was just texting back and forth with you. Like, wouldn't that mean the most important thing we can do is dissolve our conditioned limiting beliefs? If we're operating on beliefs that can't be proven 100%, converted into knowledge with 100% certainty, it would imply to me that the most important thing we can do is dissolve our conditioned fear-based limiting beliefs. But then that becomes a question of, okay, how does one actually do that?
Yeah. And I don't know, because we've talked about this, about we all seem to be made in a certain way. And I could speculate all day about that, and I don't understand it. I don't understand why you can present the same information to two different people and one rejects it, one accepts it.
Right.
Because people like to go into this whole free will debate, and I don't want to get into that, but I don't believe in free will, because can I freely will myself to believe I'm a female cat right now? Well, of course not. Well, why not? Free to do it, right? Well, yeah, I'm free to do it, but my desires and my deepest convictions would show that, well, am I free then? You know what I mean? Like true freedom of your will means nothing is hindering any thought you have, and you can just will yourself to believe whatever you want. Well, that's not how it works.
Could it be like a limited free will then? Like a contextually different?
It is a will. It's just not free.
It's not free. Okay, that's fair.
The way I see it, and again,
I
I know people don't like this, is that you have to accept that, first of all, God is your creator. I see it almost like, you know how he creates a dog to be a dog and a cat to be a cat, and they have certain instincts. They respond to certain stimuli in a certain way. That's sort of just like the baseline. And I think we are created with certain ways that our machinery works in our mind. I'm not talking about brain, like a software. This is why you pray for people. This is why Christians pray for God to change someone's heart. If they're free to do it on their own, why would you pray? What can God do? What can he do to what do you want them to change? Well, you want him to change something in the software, right? You want them to see something a different way than they have been. Well, can they just freely do that? Obviously not. There's people we have talked to over and over again about certain things, and you try to hammer, you know that we all do it, loved ones, where they're addictions or whatever. God has to be the one. Something switches like that. And it's happened to me in my life where one minute I believe something, I see something that I've seen a million times before, and it completely hits me a different way, and it changes my paradigm. You have a paradigm shift. I cannot attribute that to anything other than a divine intervention. I really can't. That's what I talk about when I talk about the will and the freedom of the will. I think we are bound by our own desires, and I think only God can change those deepest internal desires that we don't even fully understand. I really do. Like, that's just my belief on that. And
another thing I want to talk about related to that is like, is the, how do I put this? The understanding that like God itself, that is a belief that we can't prove.
Absolutely.
Too. Yeah.
Absolutely. How could you?
Yeah.
What standard is higher than your creator that you could appeal to prove him?
Yeah.
Gordon Clark, one of my, I've talked about him all the time, but he brought this up because there were a lot of people back in the day, still do, that say, oh no, you have to be able to prove God. And he's like, when God approached Abraham and gave him the covenant, who was he supposed to appeal to say, hey, was that God? Can you validate? Was he going to appeal to the devil? What about his best friend? Do they have more authority than the God that created him, right? You see what I'm saying? Like, you're back to infinite regress. What is your standard? Like, you either believe it or you don't. If you try to go this route of prove, you will never get there. You cannot do it because you have to have something prior to that conclusion that's a premise. Well, then how did you get there? It sucks.
Yeah.
And I don't know the answer other than like, I feel like if I'm standing before God, I'm going to know it's God.
Well, and here, man, this goes back to like the deep conviction, or whether you want to call it just the voice, the subtle voice of the Holy Spirit inside of you. I shared this on my Instagram yesterday, and like I attribute this to be a God thing. Like I look at this as like signs of a creator who is omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, omnibenevolent, or just some creative force that is so loving that permeates all facets of reality that if we pay attention, leaves us in this childlike state of wonder and awe at the mystery of all this. Is yesterday, I call my wife and she's freaking out and she's like, Alec, Jenna, who's one of our best friends in this area, went to Target today and she was, talking with God on her way to Target. She just like is constantly in prayer and communicating with God, and said, show me which cart I need to pick. And she saw a cart with a note in it and she instantly knew, oh, that's the one I need to pick because that must be a message for me in the cart. Picks that cart. Dude, I can't even make this up. Opens up the note. It's our family's shopping list. Dude, our family's shopping list in the cart from God knows when, because she sent us a picture of it and she said, I think this is your guys' handwriting. And I have no idea. Like it said like breakfast sandwich stuff. That's what I had written on it. And then Kylie wrote like some other things on there. So I have no idea when it was from. We're in an area of like 350,000 people. What are the chances of that occurring? Right? Like probability, quote unquote. Like for me, whether or not it is, like that's like a sign of like just the mystery of this realm, like a creator, just like a little like wink, Especially because Jenna was praying to God, which cart do I need to get? Gets that cart, and it's her best friend, us, our hand, like what are the chances of that?
And that's the thing is that you have that conviction that that's God. Can you prove that? No. My wife had this experience. We were wrapping up our trip this summer, and we were in north of Pagosa Springs, beautiful San Juan Mountains.
Yeah, so beautiful there.
And this storm had come through, and we go on a little hike right after it had kind of cleared up. And Leah it was her birthday, and we'd gone through a lot of just growth, even on our 11-week trip. It was amazing. Like we came back different people just from being out there in the creation. But that day she had prayed, and she told me this. She had prayed like God, just give me something. Let me know you're here. Dude, I'll show you the picture here in a little bit. We saw the most insane rainbow right in front of us coming down onto the mountain like it was like a light show. It was like you were in a theater with spotlights coming through the clouds, and that I've never seen a rainbow like that in my life and never will. Can you prove that was God? No. But you know what she thought? She's like, thank you, Lord. And I was just blown away. I mean, we were both just standing there like having chills. Yeah. Like we're gonna get that picture and try to frame it. It's on our Facebook page. It is unbelievable. And you just, but there was deeper than that, because it wasn't just like, oh man, that's really cool. It was like this internal, like,
that's the thing. Yeah, man.
You know? And that's something you can never explain to anybody else. And it's the same thing I think with knowledge and with all these things. Like, there's a place for the internal conviction, and it's not my job to prove it to you that's real or anything like that. Like, who are you to ask me to prove that to you in the first place? Like, why does it even matter?
Nor am I going to say that if I have this internal conviction that like I don't even know where it's coming from, that also needs to apply to you.
Exactly.
I'm just speaking that this applies to me.
Exactly, 100%. I'm not going to take that and now become a tyrant and force it on you.
Yeah, I have an internal conviction, so then I need to force this on the world.
So
God
then
has
taxation
ordained me.
and more. And like, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it's insane, man.
Awesome.
It's insane.
Awesome.
So do you remember Rachel Ward? She used to be in the train chat with us. She has Instagram Shining a Light for All.
Yeah.
Dude, her connection to our family is insane. Like insane, bro. So I kid you not. I also shared this as part of the reel yesterday because I was just giving examples and I'm like, oh, this is like, this realm is magical. Like it really is. It's just a beautiful mystery if we just pay attention.
Exactly.
I think the more we pay attention to those things, whether you're seeking it out and that's why you see them more, but like they tend to occur more. They really do, man. Whether you want to call them synchronicities, whatever. But dude, so I was really struggling, just feeling overwhelmed. It was after we just had our new baby, like financially things were kind of hard at that point, and like we just bought a new house, like all this stuff. And I get on my knees and I pray, God help me. Like that's the only thing I could like muster up to pray. Just God help me. I'm just so overwhelmed. Dude, I kid you not. The next day, Rachel texts me out of the blue and says, if you prayed for help, God sent me.
Oh my gosh.
Dude, like,
that's nuts.
Man. Yeah, is that not nuts? And I like showed Kylie, I was like, and we're just looking at each other and we're like,
what more do you know what I mean?
Right,
like,
man.
I totally agree.
Right.
I've had those things happen too. And I go, I can't explain this otherwise. I just can't. And it doesn't make it true, but it's like, that's my belief.
That's my belief. Exactly.
It happened.
And is it helpful and useful to have that belief at the end of the day?
Well, it happened recently. Leah and I were going through a hard week. She was kind of in a funk, and like, she separates real easily from me. She didn't have a lot of emotional stuff growing up. So she just kind of doesn't know. Anyway. And it was the point where I was like, I don't know what's going on. Like, I don't know. And I just pray. I was like, God, just please just help her. Change the heart. Both of us, like where we were was not, it was like the next day, we were like different people. Everything that had been dealing, it just fell off. And since then, and we joke about it now, we're like, because I was telling her the other night about all this and how I'd prayed. She didn't know that I'd done all that. And I was like, I see that as God intervening, because I was like, you were a different person. And it was like that. It was literally like that you snapped out of it after I prayed about it. And we both just like came out of it and have gotten to even a better place than we were. Not that it was anything major, but it was just kind of, those existential things that happen. But just little things like that. And it's been my whole life where I'm just like, God keeps kicking me through doors that I never thought would open. Yeah. And so that just, it just keeps driving me back to just like, I got to stop questioning everything in I want to start seeing things more in like a positive light.
Hey y'all, I'm here with Melissa Kupsch from Remedy Academy of Homeopathy. We are so stoked here at The Way Forward to be partnering with Melissa and Remedy in order to spread the message of homeopathy across the world, and also to partner on the eventual development of healing centers across the United States.
People are pretty quickly coming to realize that frequency is the future of medicine. We are witnessing the great resurgence of homeopathy right now. We're really moving away from that suppressive medical model. whether it's for eczema, asthma, hormones, fertility, anxiety, depression, trauma, whatever it is, it all starts as energy in the person's field first. If we change our field, we can completely change our life. Our 2-year academy is open worldwide to anyone who wants to become a homeopath. We've got 5 lecturers and we currently have over 500 students enrolled, which is record numbers in our field. A career in homeopathy is amazing for anyone who wants flexibility in their work and who wants to be valuable in creating this new world. We have stay-at-home parents enrolled. We have ex-medical professionals, grandparents signed up who want to learn how to heal their grandchildren and pass on that invaluable knowledge. We even have husband and wife teams. So my husband enrolled in the course with no prior knowledge of health as a background, and he is loving it.
Kylie is also enrolled as well. So my partner is, and she's so stoked to become a homeopath and to be helping to spread this message across the world.
The thing that we hear from so many of our students is, I found my thing. Homeopathy is the key. We harness frequencies from nature and we alter the field of all creations. So if anybody wants to join us or they want to know more about it, they can visit our website.
Yeah, and all that information will be in the show notes. So if you want to learn more about Remedy Academy, also Remedy Collective, also some of the homeopathic products that they have, please just head to the show notes. All of that will be listed there. This brings up an important question regarding spiritual related stuff, given the context of what we've discussed so far. So you sort of get this on social media a lot, especially coming from atheists who see the atrocities in the world. And they're like, oh, thoughts and prayers aren't going to change anything. And it's an interesting thing, right? Where like, I can't prove, but I fundamentally believe. And then I go into the whole story regarding like what Veda Austin indicates with water. And like, that's my story surrounding it. And it is, I guess you could say, internally consistent based on other beliefs that I have. Again, it always goes back to my starting axiom, but it's an interesting thing. And I just want to hear your perspective. Like, given that you have these beliefs regarding Christianity, these beliefs, we were talking offline of you having these experiences where you pray about something and then something actually changes in your life. And it's like, can you prove that it was because of the prayer? You don't know. Like, but the point that I'm getting at is, how do we reconcile the lack of evidence or the lack of use for the scientific method to prove cause and effect claims? So then we're now adding on a metaphysical supposed cause. So that makes it even more complex, and relate that to prayer. Like, do you think that there is any use in prayer, like based on your belief, you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah. And I have thought about this for a long time because of my views on God's sovereignty and omniscience. Like, I don't believe God learns new information. So then you go, well, then how does prayer work? Because if he already knows and everything's kind of already like that, you can't change the future if he already knows, right? It's already set in stone. And this has been tackled by a lot of theologians who do believe in this stuff, like the Puritans especially, and all the issues aside with a lot of the Puritan stuff, I think they get a bad rap. Like, if you want to see people who truly had faith, they did. And they believed ultimately in the sovereignty of God, but also in prayer. And not that they thought they were changing God's mind about anything, but that they were basically it's almost like God was aligning their will with his will. And that's how I see it. I already see it as not a cause. I see it as an effect. I see that prayer is already the effect of God already changing something in me, and then the outworking of what he was doing in my life. And it's wild to think about that. The analogy,
I see what you're saying.
You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not the cause, it's the effect. It's sort of like when you go to the gym and hit a PR and you think that the cause was the fact that, your next bout you could do more because you did more. It's like, no, you can't do more until you can already do more. It's the effect of growing, not the cause of it. You know what I mean? It's the same kind of thing. It's kind of mind warping.
Yeah, it is.
Obviously not a great analogy, but similar.
I get what you mean, though.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is that you can't express that ability until you can. And the prayer part to me is like, you're just aligning. It's a faith thing. It's like you're literally surrendering yourself and going, God, I know I can't do this. Like, I have to trust you. There are examples in the Bible, but again, these are men that wrote the Bible with their own thoughts. I do believe in inspiration, but not in the sense that like every single thing written in there that's an opinion of an author is necessarily like the truth. It could have just been what they thought at the time. I do think when the prophets and it was God saying, here's what I'm saying, okay, there's God. These other things where you're like, yeah, God heard the prayers and God responded. It's like, it's kind of like anthropomorphic language where you're, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know that that's actually how it works because you can't reconcile that with omniscience. You just can't.
Mm-hmm.
You got to pick one or the other. And I don't like this whole paradox crap that people try to put, well, yeah, God knows it all, but you still are changing his mind. And it's like, it doesn't work like that. You know what I mean? So I do think, but we live our lives. We're not God. We're not omniscient. We don't know what's going to happen. We're supposed to rely on God as a father. Like that's why we have earthly fathers, is to mirror that true relationship, right? Like that. There's a reason family is such a strong thing, because it's patterned, in my opinion, after the heavenly family of how I do think there's a reality there. I don't think it's an ethereal ghost floating around. I think there's a world just like this, only different. And I really do. I think there's probably, there's a reason that we're made.
You think it still could be like here though, and we're just not on the same?
I don't know that it's here, but I wonder if there's a connection point where it's like we don't have access there, but they have access here.
I've also, oh man, this is going to be 1 gazillion% speculation.
Yeah. So yeah, me
dude,
too.
but I think like the waters above, I think that physical things cannot pass through that. And that's where the ultimate heavenly realm is. And then there's obviously traveling between.
I think there is. I do. And
that is I admit that is 100% speculation.
Oh yeah, same here.
Like,
and if any of y'all listening, like if you go start reading a lot of like Michael Heiser stuff, stuff on the gods and the divine council, like, is it a lot of speculation? Yes. Is it really cool? Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the idea that these gods, and I'm not saying God and with capital G, gods just mean spiritual realm beings.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean ghosts. Spiritual. So this is something that needs to be said too real quick. The idea of the spiritual in heavenly spiritual, at least in the Greeks back in the day, and I think Paul as well, we don't become disembodied. The idea of a pneumatic body, a spiritual body, was that it was made of the best kind of stuff there was. It's not immaterial. It's just a totally different type of material than this. It is still a material. That's why you see angels with bodies. You see God, God taking form, like all these things. Angels could come and mate with women, apparently.
Well, also important note on that too is that like a lot of people attribute things that are on the electromagnetic spectrum. I know there's going to be a lot of belief baked into this, but the things that are on the electromagnetic spectrum, we attribute that to be metaphysical. It's actually arguably at some degree physical, just like outside of our typical sense of what is physical.
We don't have a clue. Again, we have no standard. I've never been to heaven. I've never come in contact with a quote unquote spiritual that I know of. But I have no standard to judge any of this stuff against, so we're all speculating at the end of the day. I don't know where we're all going with that.
I don't either, dude.
It's fun to speculate, but I do think it's cool to think about the fact that there's a connection point. You think about like, Jacob's ladder and all that stuff and the angels coming up and down. And like a lot of people say that's just metaphor, it's just, maybe, but I don't know. A lot of this stuff, they believed it. And it's like, again, do I either believe the Bible or I don't? A lot of people, especially sadly in the preterist community, have spiritualized away all things in the Bible to just be metaphor. And I just can't do that. Like even the story in Genesis, and they're like, oh no, that's not really the creation account. That's just the creation of the covenant with man. And it's like, that's not how the Jews thought of it. That's not how anyone has thought about it until you guys have come along. Not that means it's true or false, but it's like, you kind of got to read it for what it is. Like, I think that was God creating everything. I really do. Like, that's my belief, And if you start talking about, well, Adam wasn't the first human, well, then you got a big problem now with your theology, because Paul traces Adam to the problem with humanity for even needing a savior from sin. If all these other people were around before Adam, how do you know I didn't descend from them? And I may be fine. I don't need anything. I don't need to believe in God. You know what I mean?
Interesting to think about
all these implications.
Yeah.
Everything you believe has an implication. That's the point of this. I'm not trying to like proselytize people or say like that you have to believe what I believe. The point is beliefs matter.
Yeah.
All our premises matter. When you start changing the definitions of things, and that's what I see with a lot of these guys, especially again in preterism, but a lot of the different Christian denominations or whatever, they change the meaning of words around so much that nothing is what it seems, to the point where you're like, they make the Bible almost like a big code book or like a gematria type thing. And you're like, or gematria, however you say it. And it's like, so you got the code break? How do you know? If it's a code, did God tell you that? Did he give you the code breaking decipher? Who gave you the cipher, right? That's where you get into those kind of epistemological issues. So again, this is where epistemology comes in handy, is going, okay, how do you know that? Who gave you the standard? Who gave you the blueprint? All that. And it's the same with any of us. Anything we read and try to interpret, well, who gave us the proper rules of interpretation? We're back to internal convictions and things like that. Like there's so many issues with all this stuff, but it doesn't matter because it comes down to we can't prove these things. We are all stuck at the end of the day with this theory-ladenness of our observations, what we read, what we see, and how do we know the right way to even interpret these things? And I don't have an answer for it other than I know that I have a few standards that I feel are set in stone. I can deduce certain things from those. Outside of that, I'm just as lost as everybody else is when it comes to...
There's something good to be there, though, because it puts you in a position of humility.
Yeah.
And like, again, you're coming from the perspective, I'm not going to push this on to anyone else because I have no idea for sure whether this is true.
A good example, real quick, the book of Job. Go read Job. I mean, whether it's a fiction or not, you know what I mean? Like, this is a guy that had everything, rich, wealthy, but was a righteous man, a faithful guy. That's what you mean by righteous. It doesn't mean perfect. It means he was faithful. God, tests him, takes away everything, his family, his stuff, everything. And his friends, quote unquote, come and go read it. They start telling him stories about why God has done that to him. And they all make sense. They all sound good. They're all a little different. And then God comes in at the end and tells Job the real deal. And he's like, your friends are wrong. They don't know why I did this. And you don't know why I did this. And it basically doesn't tell him why. But he's like, I'm your creator. Where were you? You're questioning all this stuff. Where were you? Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Where were you when I did all these things? You guys don't have a clue what's going on at the core of reality. You don't know. And that's what I was talking about earlier with us, especially with the scientismos, where they think they're uncovering these natures of reality, the true ontological realities and metaphysics, when it's like, well, obviously not, because all these competing stories are out there and have been forever. That's what the story philosophy. It's just guys making up stories. Go read Thales, go read Heraclitus, go read all these guys, Plato and Aristotle. They're all different.
Yeah.
And they all make sense. They could all be true. They could all work. At the end of the day, it's just story time, And I thought that was cool, though. And you read Ecclesiastes, and it's like men think they're seeking out these truths. You think you know, and you don't have a clue. You don't. I can't remember if it was Jesus or if Paul is talking about, the Jews are seeking a sign and the Greeks are seeking wisdom, but it's earthly wisdom. The Jews want empiricism. They want to just see something, even though you don't know what it means. And the Greeks want wisdom, even though it's earthly wisdom and philosophy. And Paul's like, neither of those. It's just, what does God say? And that's where I come from. And I'm not saying everybody has to believe that. I'm just saying I feel comfortable that those are good axioms that I can at least think that I know a few things. You know what I mean? And regardless of what people say about atrocities in the Bible, it's like, okay, we could get in the weeds with a lot of that stuff. At the end of the day, when it comes down to like, go read the Word, go read the Beatitudes, go read Matthew 5, go read the Sermon on the Mount. That's what we're supposed to be doing. Nobody would read that and go, that's bad. You know what I mean?
Right.
At the end of the day, I think that's, and I have those principles because I believe they're truth. I believe they're universal. If you're trying to get morality out of just particulars in the world,
let's go there, because that's where I might as well go. Like,
can't do it.
Is there such thing? I already know the answer. Is there such thing as objective morality?
You have to define what objective means, because that's the issue. And a lot of the Randians, Ayn Rands, and all the objectivism was complete nonsense. It was all subjective. Everything was in her head. I think it's only objective if you believe God's revelation is legitimate. If you believe in universal morality, well, that's objective. Objective in the sense, though, that it's not subject to your own whims. That's what subjective means in my mind. Subject to what I want, subject to my pragmatism, subject to my desires. None of that matters. Like, would it be better a lot of times for me if morality didn't exist? Well, sure. There's selfish things I want to do and not have consequences. That's subject. And subjective morality is where, my truth isn't your truth. It's like, well, yeah, but that's not how truth works. I mean, my opinion's not your opinion.
Exactly.
That's not the same thing.
And I feel that most people are meaning this is my opinion of it, but it's very problematic when they equate opinion with truth.
I'll give you an example of this that happened when I was 22-ish, 21, 22, and I'm not reading the Bible. I'm in college, and a friend of mine, she'd been in college, and she's been educated now, and she's all savvy. And we were hanging out over Christmas break, and she just got in a new car, and we were sitting outside talking, and she started telling me about how there is no such thing as morality. And I was like, I'm going to take a rock, and I'm going to go break that window out of your car right now. Would you tell me that was wrong? And she's like, well, yeah. I said, why? Why is that wrong? Is it wrong just because you don't like it? Because that doesn't matter to me. Why should I care what you prefer? Why should I care about your preferences? Is it wrong morally for me to destroy something that's yours? And deep down, people know
This
It's
is
wrong.
the thing, man. So I can't prove this. We talked about this at dinner that one time before the podcast. Like, I think, and this just feels, this feels correct inside of me, that the creator of this realm has written on all of our hearts, so to speak, morality, which is why the overwhelming majority of people could see, think of the most morally reprehensible thing you could see, watch a video of that, and we all wince at it. Like, ugh. It sits wrong inside of us. I think there is not objective morality in the sense that, how do I put this? I think there is morality written on our hearts. Let's just put it that way. I won't even get into the terms. And I think that through various aspects of conditioning, just like really, really challenging experiences that people go to where it quote unquote breaks them psychologically, you know, like for example, there's a strong correlation between people who end up being mass murderers and having mothers who are completely absent and treated them like trash. I think that when you're broken psychologically at that level and you don't do the work to fix it, your moral compass, so to speak, gets totally skewed to where you can look at something like that and it doesn't touch you at all. I think that there are some things that we just know innately to be problematic morally. But I don't have any way to validate that. I acknowledge that it's a belief.
How could you? And that's the whole issue when you talk about objective morality. Well, what do you mean by most people when they say objective, they think provable.
Yeah.
Well, we've already gone in through proof. You can't prove much of anything you really think you can anyway.
Right.
So why are you trying to apply that to morality? Do I need to prove it to you that it's wrong to murder? Do I need to? You know what I mean? Like if you're somebody who just thinks it's okay to murder, well, I mean, okay. What are we going to do there? You know what I mean? Like, but most people, even when they can't give you a standard for why they think something is wrong, they still, just like we talked about with the atheists earlier, they have a high sense of morality. I see that all the time in comments online. They're very angry a lot about right and wrong. And it's like, that does not comport with your worldview at all.
Right.
Like random chemicals in motion, there is no logic, there's no truth, there's no morality.
It's really interesting to think of it like that, actually.
It's weird.
Yeah.
It's always been weird to me.
That lends credence to the idea possibly that what we're talking about here is that it is somewhere baked in.
I think it is. You know, you talk to a lot of like Christians about the law, and they'll say, well, only Israel had the law and the Gentiles were excluded. And God, it's like, well, God still judged Sodom and Gomorrah. God still judged these other nations for being transgressors of the law, because I do think that the basic law, I'm not talking about the 600 plus ritualistic laws. I'm talking about the law, the moral law, right and wrong, which is basically the laws against other people and the law against God. But we're talking about laws human to human. Don't steal, don't kill, don't, all just basic stuff.
Yeah.
That's really it. Love God, love your neighbor as yourself. It really is. That's what Jesus said. The law is summed up in those two things. Well, loving your neighbor as yourself, that encompasses don't steal, don't kill, and all these things. I do think that's written on our consciences and on our hearts. I really do.
I do too.
I can't prove it.
You know what's interesting about that though? I've thought about this lately, and I'm not saying that like God missed anything in writing that, but a lot of people don't love themselves. So when they love their neighbor as themselves, they are like, well,
The exact same. And I go, what does that mean? Because I don't think it was meant to be dissected out like that. I think, especially when he's talking to other Jews who would know what that means. But even Paul uses that example. He talks about, loving your wife as yourself. He goes, no, and he was generalizing, like nobody hates their own body for the most part. So why, if you're treating your wife as part of a team, like you need to love your wife like you love yourself. You take care of yourself. That's what the context matters. It's not like you can't nitpick it apart.
For sure.
But I've done the same thing because I go, well, I could be a pedantic jerk here.
Right.
And, Jesus would probably been like, whip you into shape, buddy. Like you're missing it. You're missing the point.
Right. You're missing the point.
Yeah,
like what
exactly.
we're getting at is like, don't be an asshole to other people.
But I do want to say this about morality because I think it touches on kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier about the state and anarchy and voluntarism. You see a lot of the voluntary community and the libertarians where they appeal to this thing called natural law. You got to be real careful with that term. And I know what people mean when they say it. I know what people mean when they say natural law is just like we were talking about, the law written on your heart. But a lot of people don't believe it that way. They think you can actually derive because a law, let's talk about law real quick. We did this last time, like a scientific law. Laws are descriptions. They are what happens. That's it. It's not a why. It's not a cause. It's not an explanation. It's just an is.
Like objects fall to the ground.
Exactly.
That's a law.
Some objects fall to the ground at an average rate of 9.8 meters per second squared, whatever, depending on the medium, right? It's all in a controlled scenario. Great. Why does that happen?
I actually question the 9.8 meters per second squared, by the way.
Oh, yeah, I agree. But some things float. Some things rise up, right? Doesn't matter. Like why people need to know the cause of that, I have no idea. Doesn't matter. When it comes to morality, it's the same issue. Like people think that they can look at nature and get morality, but that's a category error. You cannot get a prescription from a description. You cannot get an ought from an is. The ought is ought fallacy happens all the time, and it's almost like when I was seeing recently with the whole Iranian stuff and people go, well, a lot of those people were cheering in the streets. It's like, okay, and that's a description, but does that make what we're doing correct? Right. Does that give you a prescription to go bomb a country and even kill innocent people because some people like it? People like all kinds of stuff. What does that have to do with, it's no different than appealing to what people think about anything to claim a truth. I see this all the time with Christianity. They'll say, well, the Jews, they thought this. I'm like, the Jews rejected Jesus too. Not all of them, but a lot of them did. Right. Some didn't, some did. So which one's right? You know what I'm saying? Like people think all kinds of things. That doesn't tell you the truth of the matter. And it's the same thing with this. You cannot, and David Hume goes through this, and he was an atheist, but you cannot derive morality from just looking at things happening, because if you did, well, anything goes. I think it was like the Marquis de Sade that appealed to— You cannot
derive morality. That's what you said, right?
Yeah, you can't derive morality. Okay. You can't derive ethics from descriptions.
I thought you said reality there.
No, morality. Ethical norms, you can't. And here's the other issue is it's an issue with induction. You cannot get a universal from a particular. You can't. It's impossible because you can't complete the induction. You've never seen every instance of every—
An example of that is like I identified 200 white swans in my area, therefore every swan in the world is white.
Yeah. Have you seen every swan that ever existed, does exist, and ever will exist ever?
Right.
Ever. No. So you can't complete the induction. That's why induction is a fallacy. Go read Karl Popper, go read even Bertrand Russell on that.
Most people reason, in my estimation, using induction.
We have to.
Yeah.
I mean, we do. We do because we don't know the future.
Yep.
So we do, like we talked about with sitting on the chair, with starting your car, sun rising tomorrow. Like we just assume these things are going to, we assume the consistency of reality, that tomorrow is going to be like yesterday.
Yeah.
But yet we already kind of know that's not true, just like they tell you with your stock market, like, past performance doesn't indicate future results. That's why they say that. You can't look at the past to know anything about the future per se. I think I can reliably have faith that the sun will rise, quote unquote, tomorrow, because I think that's actually in scripture. I think God says, as long as the sun and the earth remains forever. That's why I don't think he's going to blow up the world. I don't ever see that in the Bible. I don't see a reason for that. That's a different topic. But as far as morality goes, like I really wish people would stop appealing to descriptions to turn that to a prescription, because it's fallacious. You're inserting things into the conclusion that weren't in the premises to begin with.
It's crazy how much time has flown by.
It's awesome, man.
Podcast, man.
Yeah, we're talkers too. So
we are, man. And me and you have like a lot of the same interests and like ways of thinking. So Absolutely. It's just flying by right now.
That's great.
So there's two more things that I want to touch on, and I'll let you pick which one you want to do first, because a lot of people asked me to ask you this: how to properly assess a truth claim. Like, what is a good argument? What is a good, like, quote unquote, truth claim? Maybe like, what's a good argument? Because truth claim, that goes back to, it depends on what your definition of truth is. Because again, my definition of quote unquote objective truth is that it can be, it's this synonymous with knowledge almost for me. So but then also how not to slip into a nihilistic perspective, given all that we've talked about. Well, we can't know anything. Well, F it. Like, what matters? Like, none of this even matters anyway. So whichever one you want to tackle first.
That's tough, man. You say the hardest ones for last.
Yeah, sorry.
Truth claims, that's hard too, because at the end of the day, it's easier to pick apart things to show they're fallacious than it is to know the truth, because to deduce something that's true, you have to assume your premises are true. And can you prove your premise? Well, no, because we're back to axioms. So it depends on what you're talking about, though. If we're talking about ultimate knowledge, or if we're talking about little things in the world that we agree on. Again, so if we agree on certain premises, then what follows from that?
If we have shared axioms.
Correct. Because that's how deduction works, is you argue from premise to conclusion, either from a universal to another universal, or a universal down to a particular. It's the opposite of induction. You can never get from a particular to a universal. You can't do it. You can claim it, but you just can't do it logically. But that's the opposite of deduction, which is arguing from a universal, either, like I said, to another universal, or to down to a particular claim, because you have that universal to then go forward from. And so that's sort of starting point for that. The hard part is like, it depends on what you're talking about. It's easy with things like morality, even though you think it should be easy, but we gave examples of statism and when people will obviously abandon those premises.
Right.
Well, what do you do at that point? You know what I mean? Like, so you're still stuck with like you're stuck with humanity. You're stuck with our own biases, fears, proclivities, desires, like all these things that hamper sound reasoning. That's why we have to be very careful about it.
That's why it's important to know some of this stuff.
That's the whole reason to do this, is so that you're not going to be hoodwinked and so that you think clearly about what it is you're doing. There are lots of ways to get places. So if we're talking about something pragmatically that's not a moral issue, I don't know if it matters as much if you're just trying to get from point A to point B. If you're talking about building a better mousetrap, building a house, there's lots of, look at all the different opinions about how to do things, even with like an engine or with like, you know what I mean? Like there are multiple ways to do things and somebody think, well, my way is the best way. And this way, it's like at the end of the day, that's more of a subjective issue.
Yeah.
It's not even necessarily a truth claim per se, because you still don't know by doing it that way, what's actually going to be the outcome. You can do everything theoretically the quote unquote proper way, textbook, and it still not go right. You know what I mean? So then you're still back to induction. You're still back to what has worked the most in the past. Like if I'm going to build this engine, what seems to have worked the best for most people with the least issues statistically?
Yeah.
Does that give you any guarantee that something's not going to go wrong? No. Is it the best you can do? Yeah. So that's, I know that's not exactly how to evaluate a truth claim.
No, but that's helpful. And that's where it's like, with the context that they can still manipulate like what variables are adjusted for and things like this, because that is absolutely a part of it. You can glean helpful information from bodies of like from meta-analyses and things like this. You can glean helpful information, useful information.
Useful for the person in whatever, because it depends on the context. It depends on what they want to use it for, because you still can't escape belief. Like if somebody genuinely believes in a lot of these entities and stuff, whatever, they're still going to do better probably by reading the papers, learning how to cipher some of this stuff and trying to make the best decision for them based on their perceived risk, based on all these beliefs they have. I can't undo all their beliefs.
Right.
At the end of the day, that is the hard part, because if you start undoing all this stuff, you go, well, where do I go from here?
Right. That goes into the nihilism.
That goes into the nihilism part. And so I think about this stuff a lot because I'm like, okay, I know that, I use that term loosely, but it seems to be that this stuff.
My experience would tell me.
My experience, and just by reading and understanding, some logic and philosophy, that these claims are not validated that to be true. About all these invisible entities and all this stuff, and you can poke holes in a lot of the narratives. But so where does that leave you? Let's say when it comes to health, okay? A lot of us would go with like the terrain paradigm, right? Do I know that to be the right one? I don't.
Right.
This is where principles come in over particulars, and over the you kind of pick your principles. It's similar to axioms. So my principles are going to be foster health with exercise, discipline, food choices, what to eat, what not to eat, toxins that I perceive might be harmful that I can't prove, spiritual discipline, family connection, like emotional state, getting out in the sun, basics that we all kind of go, yeah, those are basics. Well, that's where I go with. It really is. Now, does that mean I would never do something with the allopathic system? Not necessarily. If I had a tumor pressing in on an organ that could be safely removed, that I can't seem to get to go away, might I have a surgeon remove that? Yeah, I might. Does that mean it does anything for why it was there? No, I can't know the cause. I don't know why. But that's different. That's not a truth issue. It's more of a pragmatic issue, right? We're back to pragmatics. There's nothing wrong with pragmatic. We all have to be practical. Like I said, wearing glasses, you know what I mean? Like driving a car, all these things like to make our lives quote unquote better, but better because it's something I want. That's a subjective thing. So at the end of the day, a lot of this does come back to subjectivity.
Right. And also I can't help but again, reflect on the belief aspect of it and the possibility that alone, that itself has an influence as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's just wild to consider that.
It's huge. And that's why people's fears, and I even say that to patients a lot of times when I'm like, yeah, I disagree with that paradigm, but if this is going to cause you this much angst, you need to go down that pathway. Because the angst is probably worse for you,
right?
The not knowing, whatever. Even though for me, it's like, I know that they can't give me the knowledge I'm looking for, so I'm not going to go down that pathway per se. I knew when I had my gut issues, I'm not going to go get a colonoscopy because I didn't really have a good reason to at the time, and I know they're not going to know what's really wrong with me.
Right.
I know they're going to just randomly probably do biopsies and possibly perforate my colon and all. I know all this stuff. And like, why would I want to do that? Other people are willing to quote unquote take that risk because we don't know the future. And they are more comfortable in, oh, well, a doctor looked at it, they checked something off, they didn't find a tumor, so I feel better at night, knowing that's not there. Like a lot of people are just fine with that. As far as evaluating claims, that's where understanding logic comes in handy. And I don't mean some higher level logic course. I mean the stuff we've talked about, stuff talked about on Don's podcast, like just know the basic logical fallacies and the forms, how they present themselves. When somebody's trying to hoodwink you with a proof and using an affirming the consequent fallacy, you can immediately recognize it. It's so easy to do. And you just go, whoa, back up. That's not a valid argument. Like, let's start over. And if they keep doing it, you kind of got to pause. It doesn't mean they're wrong. Like, that's what I tell people, like, if it rains, my car will be wet, my car's wet, therefore it rained. That's fallacious. It doesn't mean it can't be true.
Right.
It may have rained. You know what I mean?
Right.
The problem is when they try to use it as with an unproven cause, when they try to go, yeah, those crop circles are from those darn aliens coming in there, and that's why your butt's sore in the morning. You know what I mean? Like, then you go, yeah, you're going to have to show me an alien.
Or a virus.
Or a virus. It's the same thing. That's why I bring that up, because like these invisible entities are gene, or these things that lead to, we're back to that. When it leads to tyranny, you still have to evaluate it and go, okay, that's never been quote unquote proven to be true, even though we really can't prove those things anyway, but nobody's even like shown existence. And I do think you can show something exists, but that's only in the context if we believe we're an external realm and a reality and all these things. But okay,
if that's a shared axiom, that's a shared axiom for most people.
It is. So that's why I don't say it like it's redundant to have to say that.
Yep.
So we do agree we're in this reality. Then we go, okay, we all kind of agree on what would probably be necessary to prove existence of something. But not everybody does. Right. These scientific realists assume that these entities are just real, but they know they can't prove it.
Based
you know what I mean?
Quote unquote inference.
Based on, well, they say inference, which is not valid. A valid inference would be a deduction. Induction or just making up a story is not a valid inference. Or they'll say, this is an indirect test.
Yeah, indirect. Yeah,
that drives me nuts.
Yep.
You can't have an indirect test for something never proven to exist in the first place.
Right.
Even if it is something proven to exist, an indirect test is not specific. And I always gave that example, with like doing an ultrasound on a kidney where there's a stone blocking the ureter. Well, you can't see the stone down there. You can't usually get down that far, but you could see some swelling on the kidney, some hydronephrosis. Well, is that specific for a stone? No. You could have hydronephrosis physiologically. There could just be, you'd be making more urine at that time as a snapshot. You could have a tumor blocking your ureter. You could have a tiny gnome in there that's constricted. You know what I'm saying? Like I could make up any reason for that indirect, that effect and claim that I made up an indirect test for it. It doesn't work that way. That's nonsense. And that's the issue with these tests that we are all talking about earlier, is that they are indirect and not specific, and these entities haven't been shown to exist. So, but I think if you can understand the fallacies involved, especially the formal logical fallacies, the affirming the consequent, you can start teasing through a lot of that. And then at the end of the day, you just got to go with a lot of times with your gut and with your perceived risk. It really is that.
Yep.
The nihilism question is one, I joke about that a lot. I actually messaged my buddy Spencer again the other night about we were talking about theology, and I was like, it's so hard not to just fall into nihilism. And nihilism, is defined differently. I think there's different levels of it where people think, well, there's no such thing as knowledge. There's no such thing as morality. There's no such thing as an external world. It's like, well, that's like solipsism. That's not even nihilism is where they say there's no meaning in anything and nothing matters.
Yep.
How I personally avoid that is scripture. Like that gives me, and I know people, he's just using it as a crutch. No, I don't. I just deep down believe it. That's my belief. That grounds meaning for me. It really does. There is no, if there's nothing after this life, what is the point?
Right.
I mean, Paul said that if this is it, eat, drink, and be merry, we die tomorrow. That's it. If there is no resurrection from the dead, eat, drink, and be merry. Do what you want. Doesn't matter. None of it matters. And a lot of people do probably maybe live their life like that. They're like, yeah, man, I'm just here to have fun because it's all over after the end. And then, whatever. You're still going to live with morals. I guarantee you they will. And the same thing with morality is that I ground morality in God's revelation because I feel like morality is a universal. If it's truly universal, I can only get a universal from the Creator because he's universal. He created everything. So that's how I would avoid nihilism. I think it's much harder. And you start reading some of these philosophers that came along later that were the materialists, and you read like Nietzsche and these guys, and like, it's depressing.
It is depressing. I think that's where it lands for me too, man. And going back to what we were sharing with what we would consider quote unquote signs from God,
that are, God like speaking to us in our lives, things that we just can't attribute to any other physical cause, right? Is like, for me, that just indicates God's presence in this realm. And that's what I believe. And again, I feel like that belief allows me to have assign meaning to this experience, which makes this experience better for me. And my starting axioms are related to that betterment, right? Like, you get what I'm saying there? I don't think I said that well, but
no, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I think about this all the time about meaning is everywhere. The ultimate question that everyone has asked, this is the ultimate question of philosophy, is why am I here? What is the meaning of this life? Yeah. What are we doing? I mean, I still ask myself that all the time. Like, what is going on? I don't know, but I have to root that in like that childlike faith that like God's got it figured out. There is a reason and a purpose, even if I don't know what it is. And my will is not aligned with God, with God's will, because I don't know what plans He has for me. I mean, they always make that joke, like, you want to make God laugh, tell Him your plans. You know what I mean? Like, we don't know. I think there's bigger interconnections than we could ever imagine. And this is all belief on my end. But I just have to ground these things in my own personal beliefs on God. And like, I don't know. It's very hard. It's hard with the knowledge claim, especially like when you were talking about like, can we know that we're even in a room right now? Can we know that this is a bottle that I'm holding right here, right? Well, it depends on how you define knowledge. I mean, at the end of the day, if you want to be truly precise in your language, you cannot know that in the sense that, like what absolute certainty, because people always will go, well, no, you could be in a dream. You could be in a simulation. You could be, somebody asked Gordon Clark that in a debate, and they said, Dr. Clark, do you know that you're married to your wife? He's like, how do I know she's not a clone? How do I know she's not, this is like 1930s, they're just talking about that stuff. And everybody laughed, but he was serious. He's like, to drive the point home, he's like, I don't know infallibly that is my wife. I believe it. Yeah. I believe that's my wife.
And that's okay.
That's okay.
Yeah,
just
okay
like you believe you're in this room talking to me. But how do you know? It goes back to the meaning of knowledge and the word. And people find that they'll go, well, that's just stupid. That's an appeal to incredulity. You being incredulous that I said that has no bearing on the truth of the matter. The truth is, if you want to get down to brass tacks and go knowledge in the sense of provable, how would you? What can you step outside this reality to prove we're in this reality? You know what I mean? It's like the whole issue of simulation theory. It's like, you can't, what are you talking about? Right. You could never even get there if you're in the simulation anyway.
Or that we're in a reincarnation soul trap.
Yeah. Yes. Dude. I mean, come up with whatever story you want, but at the end of the day, you go, well, I couldn't prove it because I don't even know what would be necessary.
And also, is that useful to believe? Because you can't prove it anyway. Like, right. Why believe that we're in a reincarnation soul trap and that there are overlords like lording over us?
Exactly. Like, what are you doing? Right. You know what I mean? Like,
how is that useful, man?
There's so many stories. And I think we get sucked into those rabbit trails of stories. And I see it all the time. You do too, with people making up stories left and right about this, that, and the other. And I get it, because deep down we want to know. We all want to know things and truly know them. I want to know why I'm here. I want to know how this works, how that works, how the lightning works, how the stars move. I want to know all that. And that's not how God set it up. And maybe one day, if we end up getting to talk to God and asking, I'm hoping for that, but it may not happen. I don't know. Right. I don't know what my job's going to be one day, after this life. My thought is that this is like, and one of my good friends, his name is Dan. He considers this life like the embryonic stage of our actual. Like, this is just the embryonic stage. Like, we're here getting prepared for the rest.
Yeah.
And I like that. I mean, it may not be true, but I like it, because there's reasons for growth. There's reasons for these things we learn. I think it has to carry over. If it doesn't, what's the point?
Right.
That's how. And again, that's like a pragmatic type of way to art. I'm not saying that's a proof, but in my own mind, when you think about meaning. Deep down, something having meaning, doesn't meaning have to be eternal? Otherwise, it doesn't mean anything, right? Like, I don't know.
No, I get what you mean. I totally get what you mean. And on the, again, going back to spectrum of nihilism versus like childlike wonder and curiosity, I like sometimes I feel like nihilistic, like what's the point of all this? I don't know what it is for sure. But then there's other times, man, where the more that I dive into things, this is almost cliche. A lot of people say this, like the more I learn, the less I know. It is true though. Like the more that I dive into these things, the less I know, which again opens it up to like infinite quote unquote possibilities. And you can look at that from a lens of childlike wonder and curiosity, like, wow, this realm is so much more magical. I have no idea what the hell is going on, but how incredible is it to be a part of this?
That's how we feel all the time. Leah and I talk about that. We sit outside in Arkansas looking at the beauty around us, and life has gotten so much simpler and quieter. You get a peace when you're not worried about all these stories and nonsensical things going on, because the fear goes away. Because a lot of these narratives are fear driven.
Right.
And fear just wreaks havoc, I think, on our bodies and on our activities and how we behave towards each other. It's hard though, because when you step out of those normal beliefs, you're in this lonely place. And it's very lonely, and you end up coming into contact with people more online because you find like-minded people. It's harder in person. I mean, it's cool that you guys have set up these things to have these in-person meetings,
Yes.
you know?
Man, it is so validating, dude.
Yeah.
Like that's the biggest thing is you kind of feel a sense of like a natural just weight off when you're around that many people.
Because you can talk freely and you don't even have to, most of us don't agree with, nobody agrees with everybody on everything.
Right.
You don't. Otherwise we'd be the same person
Right.
and that'd be boring. The whole point, in my opinion, part of this whole life is relationships. That's something that Leah and I talk about all the time too. Leah's my wife, by the way. Shout out to Leah.
Shout out to Leah. Shout out to Kylie too.
Yeah. I mean, they keep us grounded, but we talk about the fact that like we get sucked, and I think men do this more so, is that you get sucked into these like detailed philosophical discussions.
Yeah.
Not all men, and I mean, but in the majority of cases, just because
Well, men tend to be more analytical.
we're more analytical, whereas she's more like, it's all about the relationships. It's about how you treat other people, the practical side of life. And that's what she's into. When she reads her Bible, she gets things out of it that I never get, because she's looking at like, how do we live? How do we take this and translate it? And I'm going, how do I take these premises and know this and that? You know, and both are valid.
Right.
That's why
both are helpful. You
both
gotta
are
have a little
helpful.
bit of both.
But that's the beauty though, is really going, at the end of the day, these things that I have, the car I drive, the house we have, this is all going away. If my memories remain, if these things remain, then what matters is the relationships we build with each other as we are here and how we treat each other. And that's why you see all this insanity and it hurts your heart, because you realize that it's all built on fake premises to keep people hating each other. And it doesn't have to be like that.
That's it, man. You just, that's the quote. That's the quote. That's what it is. That's the reason why.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the reason why.
Yeah.
Man, perfect ending.
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Thank
mean,
you so much, Jordan.
Thanks, man. I loved it. I hope we get to do it again one day.
Yeah. I mean, well, there's still so much stuff we didn't cover somehow.
Yep.
Not surprised though.
Love it,
Much
brother.
love to you, man.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
Yep.